Vice Chairman, but we'll proceed without him for the moment. He's only acting, so it's not so bad. It's now gone past 1 o'clock. We've got a lot on the agenda and we ought to proceed. I understand that the fire alarm will not ring this afternoon, and if it does, everybody should make a hasty departure through the required fire doors. And I hope that everybody has turned off their mobile phones or left them in their office or at home. Thank you. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. Received apologies for absence from Councillor Gloria Johnson and Councillor Paul Wood. Councillor Penny Milne has been appointed as Councillor Paul Wood's substitute for today.
Thank you for those. They will be noted by you for the minutes, no doubt. Right, disclosure of interests. We're on to item 2. Members are asked to disclose any interest in matters for consideration at this meeting. Well, there's certainly a lot to be at stake for this meeting, but I don't think anybody, if they do declare an interest, they can do it when the item comes up on the agenda. Thank you. Item 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of June 2021. These are or have been forwarded with the agenda. I have authorised them before they were sent out. I'm hoping that I didn't make a mistake anywhere on them. But those people that were on the committee on that day, I trust that you will find those in order. Are there any comments on the minutes, or can I move them and we take a vote? There's nobody. All those in favour? Not that it's been seconded, but we can't. All right. Agenda item 4, this is the action sheet. The risk management on there was presented at the 21st of June. The work programme, we can see that it says complete, so those 3 are on. And there's one that's going back to December, which may seem a long while hence, but obviously we agreed that in the actions at the last meeting. Thank you. Agenda item 5. I think we've all been waiting for this. It's the Planning Service Review Progress Report. I'll ask Nick Robbins to bring this to the committee. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So the planning review to the governance audit to you today, the report before us sets out basically an overview of the review of the planning service, which has been carried out with support from Kratos, as you know. Kratos' team is consisted of a number of experts, and that includes Steve Quartermain, who is a former chief planner at the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, Chris Roberts, a former leader and chair of planning at the London Borough of Greenwich, and there was other experts as well that were instrumental in preparing the report. It's been really helpful to have the input of such experienced and qualified team in reviewing our service and helping develop or spot and develop the improvements. And since becoming the cabinet member a couple of months ago, I've enjoyed working with them all. So it's coming to Governance Audit Committee today because it's good practice for external reports to be noted and considered by this committee. And the report, as you probably read, focused on the initial report, which was received in October and published as part of the Governance and Audit Committee's agenda on the 30th of November. And however, after a request by the committee chairman, it was removed from that. Therefore, this report asks the committee to note the report that was received by the council from Kratos in October, and the action plan that has been developed and progress against those actions, which is attached in Appendix 2 in your agenda pack. The actions largely fall into two main categories: the operation of the planning service, and these are actions that we've been able to just get on with from an officer side, and most of these are complete or nearing completion. I'm going to draw your attention to a couple around structure and resourcing. Just to say that I'm pleased to say that we have appointed a new Assistant Director for Planning, Emma Whittaker, and she will start on the 20th of September. Over the past few months, we have been joined by two new senior planners, Chris and Phil, who are working well within the team, and we're not reliant on agency staff to manage our development management function. It's also important to note, I think, that some of the key recommendations in the report were to review the protocols and processes of the Planning Committee, and that includes the scheme of delegations, the role and the remit of the design pad, calling procedures, and the protocols surrounding the site visits. On the whole, for these to be implemented, these require a change to the Council's constitution, and they will go in front of the Constitution Committee in due course. They have been subject to a further piece of work by Cratus, and just to keep your committee updated, however, just to update the committee that we're in the process of informally engaging with members around a suggested set of protocols and processes that Cratus have developed, having worked alongside us for those months. The expectation is that any changes to protocol will go to the Constitution Committee in September, and if it is approved, then on to full council as part of a formal process. As part of the meeting today, we'd be grateful for any comments or questions which Nicola, Ken, or I will respond to. So what really we're looking for today is that the committee today endorse the action plan and note the planned engagement with the members ahead of any formal reports to the relevant committees. Thank you, Chairman.
Ken Lyons, do you want to add to that?
No, nothing further to add. Happy to take questions from members of the committee.
To paragraph 1.3, where it says that the planning service review was originally on the 30th, and I subsequently removed it at my request. It wasn't totally at my request. I had a request from the chairman of planning that it had not been discussed at that time by the planning committee, and I felt that at that stage they should discuss it first, and that this was too quick because nothing had been decided with the report. So I think I was quite in favour of removing it, and I think that the progress report has really come very late in view of the fact that you're now discussing other items, i.e. you had meetings yesterday and you've had pre-meetings with the planning committee members. So this report just says what has happened very historically and not particularly up to date. But we have to note it because we are the governance committee. We're not going to make any recommendations to what the planning committee wants, and it will go forward to September to the planning committee, presumably, to finalise everything that's there, and then it will go through to the Constitution Committee before we are notified as to what our intentions are in this matter. Ashley.
Thank you, Chair. I hadn't really indicated, but I think you're a lucky guess that I have something to say on this issue. First of all, you say that it will go to the planning committee. I don't think it does. Does it?
So the intention is as a consultee for things to go back into the planning committee as a courtesy as a consultee, but it's not a formal decision-making body related to the constitution, as you know. But we've had requests from the planning committee that it be considered there as prior to constitution committee, which we're intending to do.
So in an open public meeting of the planning committee, will that be?
That's the intention, yes.
Well, that will be great. That will be real progress, because this, as we know, the first report came back in October I'm not sure when the report was commissioned. Perhaps it's in the report that we've got today, but October, and then it nearly came to governance and audit in November. It's now July, almost into August, and this is the first public meeting where we've been able to make any comment about the report at all. And if I've understood you correctly, Chair, we're being asked to endorse the action plan or note it, but we're not actually commenting on the actions within it, or are we? No, so we're not being asked to offer opinions on what's within it. However, I'm going to, because I think that this review, which has cost over £40,000, I understand, already, before it's even been to a public meeting, is undermining the ability of councillors to be involved in the planning process. At the moment, any councillor can call in any planning application, regardless of where it is, as long as they have got a valid planning reason for bringing it in. And this is very useful. It's been useful for me on a number of occasions, mainly because people in the town council of Market Deeping, who feel very undervalued by the planning process, who feel ignored, especially on issues of trees, but also on issues of developments, they feel ignored by the planners and the planning process. And one of the only options available to them is to ask their local ward councillors to call it in, which has been done. But under these proposals, as a ward councillor calling it in, I would then preclude myself from being part of the discussion at the committee, unless I was to declare myself for or against an application. And in some cases, I'm not for or against, I'm just purely representing the people that have elected me to come here and the wider constituents of South Kesteven. So to give two examples of why this would be a bad thing, the first one is the contentious issue of the Margaret Thatcher statue, which is not in.
Sorry, I'm going to cut you short there. You're not speaking to the actual planning service review that's on the table. You're talking to a future plan. And Margaret Thatcher is a political point that you're trying to make capital of, and I won't allow it.
Well, I disagree, but I'll use the other example that I was going to use of the development at Castor on the cold storage unit, which was proposed, which the planning committee had meetings with the developer and then was pushed through by officers and was not called in. And why it wasn't called in, I cannot say, but this will not improve that situation because it will preclude people from calling in things outside their ward. It also, it assumes that when people call items into planning committee, they have an opinion on them and they have formed a judgment on them. And that, I think that undermines our credibility as even-handed, open-minded members of the planning committee or substitutes. But just to go back to the start, there is some description of the consultation that has happened so far regarding this report. The first interaction appears to have been in October with the planning committee only. After the hoo-ha at the governance and audit committee of November, a session was arranged again for the planning committee, but other members were allowed to observe, so not actually to comment on it. So as a substitute member of the planning committee, my first opportunity to make any comment on this in any kind of meeting, even though it was a secret meeting, was at the secret meeting with Kratos yesterday, of which there were two. There was one with the substitute members, because I banged on about it so much, saying, why haven't we been allowed to talk about it? And also there was a member session in the evening. Members across the council are very unhappy with this report, and I don't see the pathway, other than when it finally gets to constitution, that we're going to get a consensus on here. I would also mention the change of chair of planning from Councillor Bob Adams to Councillor Helen Crawford is not coincidental in this matter, I don't think. So, Chair, I'm not going to vote to endorse the action plan. I don't know about anybody else. Thank you.
Oh, Mark Whittington.
Just to thank you for your
Would you
comments.
like to reply?
Thanks for your comments, Councillor Baxter. Just to confirm, just a point of information, the sessions in October, there were sessions with all members on that day as well. So there was a morning session with planning committee and a second session with wider members that fed back on this report. So it was briefing with questions and consultation. I think I was. So Will, you were part of that. It was briefing with questions and consultation.
Are there any notes of that meeting?
Yes, there are.
Where can I find them?
Yeah, there are notes, and they're currently when we can arrange for them to be sent to you, Councillor.
Will I be able to circulate them publicly when they arrive?
I'll confirm. I'll confirm that with you outside the meeting. I'm not quite sure what the status would be, but I'll let you know.
Penny Milne, please.
Yes, thank you. As a new stand-in today on this committee, at least I do know quite a bit about this creators report. And I do have several how questions. Again, having done my training, that seems to be the way you phrase your questions on this committee. I have 5. If I say them all, and then maybe they can be addressed after that. So my first question is, how do we assess the impartiality of creators to have done this review? Secondly, how can it be implemented in part and by whom before approval of any of the recommendations? Thirdly, how is this committee going to monitor the consultation with the planning committee? And fourthly, are the processes and protocols section, which is the controversial part in whole, are they excluded from this noting today? And 5, how are we going to be advised in advance of any changes before it ever gets to Constitution Committee?
Well, I can answer 4. Yes, we're not supposed to be answering that at all today. Ken Lyons will no doubt answer all the others.
So thanks for your questions, Councillor Mills. And if I can say, actually, thank you for Councillor Mills' input throughout this, because I think she's provided some really helpful challenge and thoughts throughout this, which has been appreciated. So thank you for that, Councillor Mills. So in terms of how have we moved forward, so if you look at so realistically, most of the actions that have moved forward to completion are in the first section of Appendix 2, or move forward significantly. And those are things realistically that all fall within the kind of officer remit of the committee. So there were things that were just that as officers, they were relatively uncontentious improvements that could be made to the service to bring things forward, to get the right resourcing in place, and to do that. So we rather than although we would have liked to have had the report noted and approved earlier, we and could have brought it to a subsequent committee, as the chair's pointed out. There were things that we have the delegated authority already to carry on and move forward. And so rather than kind of lose time on those improvements, we've not wanted to do that and to make that happen. So that was the first question. Sorry, Councillor, I've forgotten your second question.
Sorry, I did rather overwhelm the system, didn't I? The second one was, how can that action plan have been implemented, and who decided on it before approval of any of the recommendations? Was that part
So that was
your
kind of the answer that I answered, which is that it was within officer, the ones that have been progressed through to completion or near completion are within officer delegation. So they were decided on within the officer corps effectively to move forward. And I think I don't think that there's anything that's contentious within that first section.
Yes, thank you for that. And my third question was, how is this committee to monitor the consultation with the planning committee, bearing in mind I think we might all agree that they are the people who know best about the planning service from a member's point of view, having been involved in implementing a lot of the policies and programs.
So we're, as I've mentioned to the chair and Councillor Whittington, who's vice chair today, we're comfortable with reporting back or monitoring back into this committee in whichever way it wants to be updated on progress. So if you want us to report back, including consultation, either into future meetings or to provide a written report, I'm more than happy to do that. Yes, I'm more than happy to do that. We've tried to be clear about the consultation that's taken place so far, what has and hasn't happened. So we'll continue to do that with whichever way you prefer, Chair.
Thank you for that. And I know you've been very good now at distributing some of that extra information that we all felt we'd gone into a little bit of a black hole or a void not having. And my fourth question was, are the protocols and processes section excluded from today's meeting?
I think the chair covered that's not what we're discussing today.
And my fifth one was, how is this committee to be advised in advance, or any members actually, of the changes before you take it to Constitution Committee?
Again, quite comfortable with circulating reports to members of this committee in any way that you wish beforehand. The intention is to be open with the communication about what's going forward. So if you ask however the committee would like it to be communicated, we're quite happy to communicate it in that way. So please ask and we will provide.
Thank you. And I'm not sure, Ken, and I apologise if you've answered my first question, was how do we assess the impartiality of creators to have done this review?
So it's difficult to know. I'm not quite sure exactly what you mean by the impartiality. In what way do you mean? But other than to say that that will be part of my response, in that one of the reasons we wanted to work with creators was because of the expert team that they brought with them, and particularly with Steve Quartermain as the former chief planner in MHCLG. We felt that, and with his experience as a local authority planner, it was felt when they were appointed that he could add a real value and a real really impartial external observation into the process. But I'm not quite sure I'm not quite sure how to answer that question other than that, really.
Well, it's just that if you Google creators and their business that they are in the business of advising developers how to approach councils and how to get their development proposals through quickly. And here they are advising councils on how their planning processes should work. I find that rather a conflict, which I think perhaps needs addressing.
Chair, may I add to that and say that creators were appointed without a competitive tender process. We have spent £40,000 with them, and that is in breach of our normal procurement regulations, other than it's been signed off by senior officers.
Yeah. So noting comments that you've made, Councillor Mills and Councillor Baxter, thank you. Realistically, I mean, my view is, having worked with creators over the last few months, that the team they brought, and as I say, with Steve in particular, as somebody who has operated in that senior planning role nationally and in local government, that they have brought an impartial view to it. But I've got no other way of responding to that question, really. But but thank you for your comments.
Yes, thank you, Ken. It's just that I do feel that cross-party, a lot of members and members of the planning committee feel that they're not necessarily impartial, and that some of the comments about the planning committee and how they operate have been, what's the word to put it without being rude about it, less than honest. And there is also the issue, and I brought it up last night at the briefing, of the white paper going through government, and that the Kratos review could be deemed to be seeking to promote what that white paper is about to hopefully bring into mainstream rules and regulations as to how we all go on with planning. And yet we don't know the measure of any reforms to that white paper and how far it will get. So I found, again, a bit of a conflict of interest there. So
I think
again,
we've
I
gone
feel
into
that
the
needs
realms of what was discussed last night, which is not on the table at the moment.
no, it's in the context of the Kratos impartiality to have done this review.
There's not a sort of specific response to that question, other than, as I say, we think that the team that they brought to work with us has provided that kind of impartiality, but there's probably not an objective way of assessing impartiality. But we believe that they have been impartial in the way that they've worked towards it. But I do know, and we have noted throughout, and committee's concerns about various things. And I think if you look in the action plan, there's instances where committee through the consultation have raised concerns or put clarifications in, and the actions have either been removed or changed significantly from what was initially proposed. Which so it's not just been a kind of one-off take it or leave it approach, really. And I think Councillor Mills has been very helpful in raising some of those things, both within the committee and to me and to others as well, which we've been very grateful for.
Councillor Susan Woolley.
Don't know where that's come from, Chairman. There's far too much ink on there. The only person that calls me Susan is my mother, and that's when I'm in trouble. So it's going to be more of the same, I'm afraid. That and I will phrase the question in a similar way to Councillor Mill. How can I be assured on the value for money for this report? I believe it's the first time I've seen it, because I don't sit on the planning committee, etc. And I was going to ask if we knew how much this particular consultation had cost. So I'm grateful to Councillor Baxter for filling me in on the funding. But it's on the back of what I heard last night. What I've read here, these are apparently experts. Wait, there is nothing in here. There was a comment made last night by a member to do with highways. Now, I would have suggested that they are one of the critical partners, critical consultees as far as an arrangement with planning is concerned. I see nothing in this report to encourage either the committee or members to speak to highways departments. In fact, the comment that was made last night was that our planning department tells the committee that there aren't any comments coming back from highways. And I've explored that in the meantime. And I think that we need to question our planning department, because that isn't accurate. It adds to the comments around the various points that others have made, so I'm not going to repeat them at all. But we've paid a lot of money for what looks like a very second-class document that, quite frankly, anybody could have picked up, and there seems to be an awful lot of cut and pasting going on. And I hope that we will recognise that any of the recommendations that others make a decision on elsewhere will be for the benefit of our residents and not for the benefit of the council.
Thank you for that, Sue. Very difficult to comment because I wasn't there last night. I was there in the afternoon. But we shouldn't be discussing whatever was said last night or this morning, or in the afternoon, because that is not part of the recommendations. So we shouldn't be. we're not to that stage yet.
Sorry, Chairman, but point of accuracy, conversations with councillors was mentioned in this report, and having briefings was mentioned. So I do apologise if it was meant to be a confidential briefing. I wasn't aware of that, but it is actually mentioned in these papers.
Ken, would you like to come
Yeah,
back?
just to say, Councillor Willie, I think the response to that, which was around the highways issues, which was a general response around that's come through the theme of the report, was around actually really working hard to improve relationships across the planning system, both with officers, members, and external statutory consultee bodies. So I think. And I think that is the solution to the issue that was raised. Wherever the fault lies, the solution is around improved relationships and clear communication and expectations around comments from highways or indeed any other statutory bodies. I think So just to say that it wasn't that I think that was an internal response that you got, not from the authors of the report, but their view was very much. And has been throughout the report about having those positive relationships.
I think the point that I'm making is that we paid a lot of money for a report that doesn't actually say that in this document. You've just said it. I agree with you. But can we just be clear on, was last night's meeting confidential or not? Because I wish to make a further comment, which if it was confidential, then I won't.
So yeah, no, last night's meeting, the documents associated with it were intended to be confidential.
I'm sorry,
So last night's meeting and the documents that were associated with it were intended as a confidential meeting, just to help shape thinking ahead of any engagement with formal processes.
Okay, well, in that case, I will frame my comment a little but more carefully. I go back to the quality of the document, and that was evidence, I felt last night, by comments that some of the presenters were making, and I really think that we as an organisation should be following up on that.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. My apologies for being a bit late. My wife's car's off the road, so we're going to go on car at the moment. So I'm dependent on lifts, and she's a bit late back from work, so my apologies. I've been through the documents and the report from Traces, and I think I tend to agree with some of the comments that have been made by other members. It's the tone of it and some of the wording of it that I take exception to, and also certain aspects of it where it becomes obvious to me as chairman of the Constitution Committee that when they've been preparing this report, they've not even bothered to look at our existing constitution. I'm referring specifically to paragraphs 26 and 27 as just as one example, where they talk where they refer to the fact that now if the planning committee wants to, they can defer a decision to request for further information. And then they're allowed a 5-day period to send those questions to make the points as to why they've refused the application to the relevant officer. Now, that's actually contained within our current constitution. Now, and their response to that is, this practice is indefensible. Well, it's in our constitution. So, and it's just that's sort of indicative to me that they've actually just not bothered to actually look to see what we actually do. And I've been contacted by a number of backbenchers, cross-party, some people who sit on the planning committee, others who don't, expressing real grave concerns to me about this report, about the language it uses, about the fact that, and there's a tone in here that I find slightly patronising towards the council, towards the planning committee. And certainly that tone, unfortunately, has been coming through as some of the consultation events I've been to as well. I'm not particularly happy about the quality of the report at all. If we actually look at the recommendations, if you look at those recommendations that potentially will go to the Constitution Committee, Recommendations 3, 7, 8, 9, 10, 14, 15, 16 and 20. If all of those were to be implemented as they are, that would in effect be a total rewrite of our constitution if we were to accept those. Now, at no point during this process has the Constitution Committee been consulted by creators. I can only speak as the current chair 6 weeks, but I've been a member of the Constitution Committee for the past 2 years. And I'd have thought that any outside company making recommendations that have such a profound effect upon our Constitution would at least have the courtesy to speak to our Constitution Committee, and they haven't. Obviously, if we went to action plan, a large amount of this, and probably the most contentious items, will be coming to the Constitution Committee at some point in the autumn. As part of that process, I'm going to speak for officers, and I would like notes of all of the consultations that have taken place so far, plus all the consultations with the Planning Committee and the views of the Planning Committee, and for members in general to be made available to the Constitution Committee at our meetings when we consider these questions, because I believe it has such a profound effect on our Constitution if we were to implement them. I won't go on any further because a lot of the points that I was going to make have been more than ably covered by Councillors Baxter, Milnes and Woolley. So thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I have had a request to speak from a non-member, Charmaine Morgan. Is anybody objecting to that, or would you be happy that she'd be allowed to speak?
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate you allowing me to attend today. Just to explain that I do so in my capacity as the Labour Group Leader and also a member of the Planning Committee. I've served 3 terms on the committee. First of all, I would like to, I've listened with great interest to the comments made today, and I feel slightly encouraged by them, to be fair, given the role of this committee in scrutiny. I would like to support a number of the comments made. First of all, I also independently looked up Kratos and looked at the expertise of the members of Kratos, and being blunt, I had serious concerns regarding their association with the development community, and in fact their experience is as great as a number of members of our committee and councillors in the council. So I think that we need to be very clear of that, although it's always useful to have an outside view on the world in which we operate. I actually did attend the presentation that took place in October, and the reason, or one of the reasons that in fact we had a subsequent meeting, was because I called for substitutes to be involved. I challenged why they hadn't been involved in the first place. I was extremely concerned about that as valid committee members. So I am glad that subsequently they were. But I was very concerned. A number of issues were raised at that first presentation. And when I saw the subsequent paper, and I won't go into great detail because I know that's not the purpose of today, but when I looked at the next paper that came through, having been told it was only a draft earlier on, basically the majority of the concerns that had been raised at the first planning committee meeting were not addressed. And in fact, the paper looked very, very similar to the very first draft, which in my view, it was an issue. I would like in particular to pick up on Councillor Baxter's comments regarding, and he's not alone in this, the changes to the calling process and the impact they may have. Just to flag in particular, in course in Grantham, it's a town with no parish council or town council, so therefore it's quite often the case that members may actually look at other wards quite legitimately. And that's just one example of where actually that proposed change to have only the ward member make comment was really not relevant, and I felt there was a lack of understanding of our district, and in particular Grantham, within that document. I have, without repeating everything everybody has said, although in fact I actually endorse everything so far I've heard, I have got some quite key questions. What weight is actually going to be given to the creator's paper? The reason I ask that is yesterday during the session, and again, some of us were there twice and some for the first time, with the concerns that were raised quite repeatedly, the response that creators gave was, well, actually, we're just here to give you some advice, and they are just guidelines. One concern I have regarding that, though, is already planning officers in committee, it's interesting, it's meant to be secret, have actually referred to creators' comments in the document. I raised a number of concerns in planning regarding the co-op site in Barrowby, and I was specifically told that I had to consider quite, I have to vote in the derogatory manner, which picks up the comment, I think, by Councillor Whittington, that I had to take into account the needs of the whole district, as if I wouldn't do that anyway. But actually, that's also inaccurate. So going back to Councillor Whittington's comments regarding how technically correct this document is. Actually, I'm sure any committee member.
I'm sorry, but we're not dealing with specific cases here.
I'll make a general point. As any of us know, I was picking up one example with the accuracy of the report. We are required to refer to local plans, of core strategy, and the national planning policy forum process. That is our point of referral, neighbourhood plans. Therefore, if we are doing that, we're doing our job. So I just picked that as an example. If that is in this document, and how good a quality is that document? So I think it's really important we do understand today what weight's going to be given to this throughout the rest of the process and the action plan. And then finally, if we're going to go to the Constitution Committee to build this in, that's a huge amount of work, Councillor Whittington said. And we know it's going to be referred back to planning, but we've just been told by Ken that actually that will be for largely information. Where's the decision going to be made before the work's done in Constitution that actually we accept what's before us?
Yes, Mark Whittington, come back on that one.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. That's a very, very valid point, and I've asked this very same question myself to officers this morning about, previously we've had external reports that have come in around housing in Riverside, which went to full council. Now, I'm not saying necessarily that this should go to full council, but a decision was taken by a body of this council to adopt a report. My concern is that no actual body within this council, no democratically elected and accountable body in this council has actually formally acknowledged or accepted it or taken it on board. And that is, and for me, that's a massive hole in the democratic process that I'm still waiting really for an answer that makes any sense to me, because I can appreciate what Ken's saying, that some of the more sort of operational type stuff that probably isn't contentious, that's probably fair enough, that if there are any things that, simple solutions to obvious problems, probably I've not got that much of an issue about if they're, at that sort of operational level. But some of the more fundamental stuff around, the constitution, policies and procedures of the planning committee and this council, surely at some point it's got to be accepted by a body of this council. I know Ken wants to come back.
So just to thank you for that questions. Both are pretty similar, so thank you. So I mean, I think as you pointed out, this is a piece of advice to us that we can, and the subsequent work that we as a council have the choice as to whether or not we adopt some or none of it. That is our choice, and that will go through the democratic process in the right way. This committee is being asked to note the report and endorse the action plan. The stuff in the action plan with detail around is around some of that officer stuff. and the action plan around those contentious items that involve changes to the constitution is within the scope of the Constitution Committee. So my expectation is that if you as a committee choose to accept that today, then that will then go on into the Constitution Committee process, and there will be consultation and various sessions with Constitution Committee before that would be taken forward. I believe that following Constitution Committee, changes like this would then have to go to full council to be approved also. So there's absolutely no sense in which this won't get will not get the full weight and scrutiny of the democratic process, other than of the items that are essentially within the officer's delegated authority to decide. So I just want to reassure members there is no sense in which these are decided. There is a process of which all members will be engaged and have the opportunity to have their view on, and the appropriate committee to enable that to happen.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. On the back of what
Sorry.
Ken's just said, could I make a suggested amendment then to the recommendations, and that under recommendation 1, that we note the action plan rather than endorse it, so that then it can go away to the committees?
I
Thank
was
you.
going to do that.
Oh, right. Well, I beat you to it then. All right.
Thanks, Ken. I appreciate your comments. I will let the committee members know. I have been in contact with Ken regarding some of my concerns around this. And myself and Ken are going to, initially, myself in my capacity as chair of the Constitution Committee and Ken as Assistant Chief Executive, we're going to start this process going in the next couple of days on we can. But in terms of this, as far as I'm concerned, yes, obviously, actually, this will be a private meeting between myself and Ken, but I'm more than willing, I'm sure you would, Ken, that our discussions can be, I would make available to any member of the council who wishes to ask me about them and how they're going on the sort of framework that we're trying to develop for how the process would go to the Constitution Committee. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
I understand you want to come back, Ashley. Final point then before we take a vote.
Yes, I would like to propose an amendment. Before I do that, item 2 of the recommendations on page 15 says notes the planned engagement with members. I appreciate some specifics about the planned engagement with members, because other than one of the paragraphs on the following pages, there aren't any specific dates, times, names of meetings, names of consultees, or anything else. So if I'm noting that there is some planned engagement, that's great. I'd be happier if I knew what the plans were. But as for the amendment, as I've mentioned, parish councils and their faith or lack of it in the planning process to date, I would say that I've been invited by the communications team to comment on the celebrated Wyndham Park in Grantham, where I've never set foot. I'm happy to fill in the consultation because it affects the residents of a district. In the same way, this process also affects all the residents of a district, and I would like the committee to recommend a public consultation on the review or the recommendations before it goes to Constitution Committee. Is this the right place to do that? If it's not, tell me where the right place to do that would be.
Well, it's certainly not the right place this afternoon. Ken?
So I suppose that would fall within the remit of the Constitution Committee. So a report, so as part of the initial report to Constitution Committee, that would be the opportunity to debate whether or not that was the right course of action. I don't know if Graham, is that correct? So that would be within the remit of that committee.
Okay, so when it comes to Constitution Committee, and perhaps I'll have a public or private meeting with the chair before that, but when it first gets to Constitution Committee, I will certainly want to recommend a public consultation before it is agreed by the Constitution Committee.
Ken, once we've had an initial chat through and we've agreed a plan for the Constitution Committee, I would like to be in a position then to share that plan out to everybody, just so people know how the next phase to Constitution Committee is going to be laid out the sort of evidence that the committee would like to receive and that sort of thing. And then I'd sort of welcome members' input into that process if they think there's anything that has been missed out. And I'm not talking about at the moment actually your request for a public consultation, but just initially up to the initial report. Because I want to be as honest, I want to be as open as I possibly can with this, because this potentially affects all members, and the Constitution Committee really has to be the protector of members' interests. Thank you.
I'm happy to do that. And just to answer the first part of your question, Ashley, which was, sorry, Councillor Baxter, which was around planned engagement. So partly the report was written ahead of the sessions yesterday, so those were part of them, but also Councillor Robbins outlined in his introduction planned formal engagement with, well, as I mentioned with Planning Committee, and Constitution Committee, and then on to full council. The first of which we'd plan with Constitution Committee to be in September, but then depending on what the recommendations of that committee are, will then depend on what the future consultation will be. And just to say, in terms of informal discussions between members and myself, I think as I hope all members do, that I'm more than happy to have a discussion around it informally and shape actions on the basis of concerns as well. So there's yeah. So in terms of actual dates, the date that we're planning to go into the constitution process is September. Pardon?
I think the next meeting
Okay.
available.
So
I let Mark, Councillor Whittington.
sorry, yeah.
Thank you. On that, at the meeting of the Constitution Committee earlier this week, I did, under Chairman's probably for the end, asked for a report on the Crate House and the impact to go to the Constitution Committee in October, because we've got a fairly sort of shortened meeting in September. And obviously that was passed and agreed by the Constitution Committee. I'm starting to think, subsequent to that maybe, but it may be difficult because to change a decision of one committee, and there may be just some kind of update in September as to where we're going might be useful, because I'm very much aware that this is a very, very contentious issue. I can't, as chairman of the Constitution Committee, just unilaterally say, oh, I'm going to shift that paper from October to September, but perhaps just an update on progress towards an action plan in September. It's an additional item. I probably could request that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, but yes, thank you. So hopefully that answers your question, although with two answers, Councillor.
Chair, could I ask the cabinet member? Well,
I'm going to move to the vote.
so I can't ask a question of the cabinet member.
Not at this stage. Ask it outside the meeting.
Well, that won't be a public forum, Chair.
Go on then.
Can I ask the cabinet member if he supports the idea of a public consultation on this issue of changing our planning system? Thank you.
Not a public consultation. I believe the planning system is internal and can be discussed and consulted within members, all the members across the party.
Councillor Penny-Milne.
Yes, thank you. Just very quickly, can you just clarify for me points 1 and 2 of the recommendations? Are we going for noting only? And are we clarifying the planned engagements for the future before we go to this vote?
Item 1 says notes the action plan because Sue Woolley moved that and I seconded it. And the second one remains the same. Oh.
Mr. Chairman, I know further in the body of the report, it kind of gives it mentions that in terms of feedback to this committee, possibly a period of 6 months was mentioned. I'm just wondering, Mr. Chairman, if I'm guessing that once the action plan's up and running, where we are in the process, it probably should come potentially 6 months. But I'm just wondering if, because of the slightly contentious nature of where we are now, it might be an idea for a progress report to come back perhaps in 3 months, and then before we move to the 6 monthly cycle. I don't know what your views are on that.
You're moving that as item 3 then?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll go along with that. I don't know whether- Yes, Ben.
Yes, can I just clarify also what is going to happen to the processes and protocols section of this report, which is removed from today's discussion, and what the timeframes or what's going to happen to that?
That will be done by Ken through that particular.
So that will go into the Constitution Committee as we outlined earlier. So into the Constitution process. So which we had some thoughts about how that would work, but I'm going to meet with the chair of the Constitution Committee later this week to map out, and we'll update members on that following that discussion.
But can you just clarify, Ken, it won't come back to this committee?
It won't come back for decisions about the Constitution, but it can come back as to progress against what's happening. So the action plan that's in here, we're quite happy to update that regularly and send that to wherever, because it's so that can come back, but the decisions will be in Constitution Committee.
You see, I'm a little bit concerned that we're dealing with this in a piecemeal fashion, and I don't fancy, the processes and protocols section, which is the controversial one, skipping this committee and ending up straight going to Constitution without further noting or endorsing. So I'm very keen to know the route that is going to take in the future.
Come on then, Ken, explain the route.
So the route for that element will be through Constitution Committee. I don't believe, other than receiving and overseeing the action plan for the report, I don't think that the Constitution items fall within the scope of this committee. So happy to be totally open and report whenever you like back into the committee, either as the meeting or by paper. But the decision needs to be taken by the decision-making body within the council. And as I say, if this committee would like an update before or after going into it, more than happy to do that as well. But the decision will be via the Constitution Committee.
Yes, I think we can accept the decision will be the Constitution Committee. I'm just wondering if we're skipping a little bit of that process, that route, and why otherwise would this element of the Creators Report come to G&A first either? So I just don't want us to skip a process, because I think it's an extremely important element.
I think you're quite right, Penny. I believe the Planning Committee should discuss it before Constitution, the full Planning Committee, but it's not down where I can see it.
As I mentioned earlier in response to Councillor Baxter's question and questions last night, that is the intention. Sorry, Councillor, I didn't mean to talk across anyone. But that is the intention to do that, so thank you.
Right, can we now move to the vote, please? Charmaine, do you want to come back?
Thank you very much. I think it's still fuzzy about the actual. We raised it earlier, and we were told that it was going to planning for NOTE. Your point was that the planning committee should have an actual say on the paper before it goes to Constitution, which is not the same as noting. And I think, actually, it seems to be potentially a solution is that there's a joint committee, because there's an interest of both planning and Constitution Committee. But I think we still aren't clear on the actual decision-making route, which was was my earlier question.
Yes, Ken.
Sorry if I've confused things. The planning committee would be for consultation, and I would expect that the report that then went to Constitution Committee would reflect the feedback of planning committee in it. So it would form part of the decision of the Constitution Committee, but the Constitution Committee is the decision-making body. So it'd be not for noting, but for consultation. And I think I used the word for information earlier, so that's my fault, but it is for consultation.
Yes, Mark.
Thanks, Ken. It certainly would be my intention to at the meeting of the planning committee that discussed the report, I would attend that meeting, so I would ensure that when the report did come back to as part of the evidence to the Constitution Committee to make our decision, that the report reflected the views and concerns and suggestions of members of the planning committee, because I do think the planning committee do need, even though they aren't officially the decision-making body, it affects them so profoundly that as the Constitution Committee has got to take their issues, concerns and views into account in the decision-making process. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Can we now go to the vote then? Items 1, 2 and 3 with an update coming to the next meeting of this committee as to where the procedures are. All those in favour? No, recommendations 1 and 2 with number 3 added for us to have an update on where it is with the Constitution.
So we're not going to note.
We're going to note the first 2.
Right, so we're changing the word on number 1.
Yes, indeed. Yes, because you and I seconded it. So, yeah. Right. Are we all clear? Probably not. All those in favour? 3, 4. All those against? Abstain? 1.5, 2. Right. So that is virtually carried. I say virtually. So it's Alison, all right to present this lengthy document.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A draft copy of the Statement of Accounts is attached to Appendix 1 to the report. The accounts are currently under review, and any changes to the draft accounts that are formally published on the 30th of July will be reported back to this committee in September, along with the audited accounts and the audit opinion. The public inspection period for the accounts has been confirmed, and it will begin on the 3rd of August and will continue until the 13th of September. And a notice has been published on Council's website to this effect. I'll just now go through briefly go through the statement of accounts and then obviously take any questions. So if members can turn to pages 56 and 57 of the agenda reports pack, you will see that the accounts made up of a number of different sections, and as detailed on page 57, there are a number of notes that support the figures in the main statements, as well as providing additional information. So I'll just go through the main changes, main differences, in the comprehensive income and expenditure statement, movement in reserve statement and the balance sheet between 2019-20 and 2020-21. So if members can turn to page 74, please. This details the comprehensive income and expenditure statement. This shows the accounting cost of providing services. Members will note that there's been a reduction in the cost of service from 12.5 million to 6 million in 2021. This primarily relates to an HRA revaluation gain of £12.3 million compared with only £9 million in 2019-20, and a reduced impairment charge of only 2.6 million in 2021 compared with 4.5 million in 2019-20. These are accounting adjustments, so they're reversed out through the movement in the reserve statement as they're not cashable figures. Taxation and non-specific grants, there's more detail to this note in note 10, has increased from 17 million in 2019-20 to 20.5 million in last financial year. This primarily relates to Section 31 grants received to fund the cost of COVID. These include the council tax hardship grant, the co-payment losses grant, and the COVID support grant. So this has increased the surplus to 8.4 million in last financial year compared to a deficit of 1.1 million in the previous financial year. There has been an increased surplus on the revaluation of non-current assets, but that primarily relates to the HRA increased revaluation gain. And then the pension liability gets revalued annually, and that has now is a deficit of 14.9 million compared to a surplus of 10 million. But this will relate to changes in the methodology for estimating the discount rate and inflation forecasts. But again, these are all reversed out through the movement in reserve statements, so they don't have any impact on the council taxpayer, as they are they're accounting adjustments, not real cash adjustments. If members turn to page 75, this details the movement in reserve statement. So this details our total usable reserves and our unusable reserves. So the unusable reserves contain things like the pensions adjustment, the collection fund adjustment, the revaluation adjustments. They're all non-cash items because you can't recognise a revaluation gain until you've actually sold the assets. Members will note that there has been an increase on the general fund reserves. They've increased from 18.6 million to 29.2 million pounds. This primarily relates to Section 31 grants that were received in year to fund the cost of the additional business rate reliefs that were awarded to businesses. So these have been earmarked to fund the collection fund deficit, which I'll go into a little bit more detail later on. The unusable reserves balance has reduced from 181 million to 172, and this primarily relates to the revaluation of the pension liability, an increased collection fund deficit, and an increase on the revaluation reserve. But pages 122 to 127 of the agenda pack will provide members with more information of the balance. Members can now turn to page 76. This details the balance sheet for the council. So it shows the council's assets and liabilities at the 31st of March. Net assets have increased by roughly 6.7 million between years. So I'll just go through the main differences. So if we start at the top line, which is property, plant and equipment, there has been an increase in the value of council dwellings, which again relates to the revaluation increase in the comprehensive income and expenditure statement. Short-term debtors has increased from 6 million to 17.7 million. This relates to the collection fund debtor that the council has with Lincolnshire County Council and central government. So that will be repaid in future years. And there's been an increase in cash and cash equivalents, which primarily relates to the receipt of additional Section 31 grants. So the council's received business grants, which it will then obviously pay out to businesses. So this balance will reduce in the current financial year. Other long-term liabilities has increased from 51 million to 69 million pounds. This relates to the net liability of the pension fund, which has increased. And the note number there is incorrect. It's not note 34, it's note 32, which provides further details of this adjustment. And then if members could finally turn to page 140, this details the collection fund. Members will note at the bottom of this statement on the business rates column, there's a figure of £22.7 million there, which is the deficit that the collection fund currently has, compared to a £322,000 surplus in last financial year. This is split between central government, ourselves and Lincolnshire County Council, and it relates to the additional Section 31 grants that were received in year, which reduced the net rates payable down to £21.9 million compared to £42 million, which we were originally anticipating collecting from the fund. So because of the technical nature of the collection fund, we withdraw £42 million from the fund, but we've actually got Section 31 grants to fund our £9 million deficit, hence the Section 31 grants that are received in year being moved into an earmarked reserve, so that these can then be used to fund the deficit when it's recognised in future years. Final point for members to note is that group accounts have been produced for Gravitas. The council is only required to produce group accounts for Gravitas, as these show a material difference between our own accounts and the accounts when they're grouped together, because obviously Gravitas hold assets and they have a balance at the bank. We're not required to produce group accounts for Environment SK and Invest SK, as they receive their funding primarily from the council, and so upon grouping there would be no material difference between the two sets of accounts because we eliminate any intergroup transactions. And just to confirm that group accounts will be produced for Leisure SK in the current financial year, but they've only been operating since the 1st of January, so there wasn't a requirement to produce them this year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. That seems a very brief oversight into what is a magnificent document. Richard is going to add some more figure work.
It was, I'm going to try to avoid figures, Mr. Chairman, but I just wanted to just make two further references. One is in respect to the annual governance statement, which is in the pack in draft format. That's for members this afternoon to scrutinise and comment on. That is an open and honest reflection of the governance framework of the authority for the financial year 2021. It will be ultimately signed by the leader of the council and the chief executive, and will be subject to audit alongside the statement of accounts, but it's with you this afternoon in draft format, and it details the actions undertaken in terms of strengthening the framework, but also the actions that will be required for the forthcoming year. There's an absence of the external audit opinion, because obviously that's yet to be produced. Just speaking of external audit, the more seasoned members would expect to see an external audit plan on the same agenda, but for reasons outside of our control, they've been unable to submit the external audit plan. So I will be seeking a delegation from the committee to myself in consultation with the cabinet, the chairman and the cabinet member for finance, to approve the external audit plan upon its receipt, and to also undertake the audit risk assessment that is required prior to the external audit commencing with the authority, which is expected in early August. So I'll come up with some suitable wording for Graham and for the action, but it's a recommendation to have a delegation in place from the committee to myself in consultation with yourself and the cabinet member for finance to accept that plan. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Have we any questions on Mark Whittington?
Yes, thanks, Alison, and thanks, Richard. Very good in-depth report. I have to say, I'm an accountant, so this sort of stuff I love reading through. I'm sure the chairman does as well. It's a very informative report. My advice to sort of any non-accounting members of the committee is the actual narrative statement at the front is really useful. Start for 10, as it were, to sort of run through, because that gives a real good overview of the council's sort of performance during the year. The only one question I've got, Richard, which I don't think either yourself or Alison mentioned, was the value for money statement, just an update of potentially where we are with that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Yeah, and again, it's a key part of the external audit plan when it's normally presented. The external auditor would present some of the key risks around the sector generally and where their focus will be in terms of materiality, but also in terms of where they believe for authorities in terms of financial resilience and the hotspots around their processes. So again, unfortunately, because we haven't got the plan in front of us, we can't really explore exactly where their focus will be. But obviously, when it does arrive, we'll share it across the membership of the committee. The judgment itself and their opinion will come back to the September meeting as part of the auditor presentation. Once they've audited the accounts, and the value for money opinion will be part of that presentation.
Thank you. Alison, I have a question. Page 61. The council's response to COVID-19. It says support to businesses. Am I correct in thinking that the support to businesses was financed by the government and not by this council?
That is correct. It was fine. We administered the grants on behalf of government.
Go on then, sir.
And have we spent all of that money, or have we passported through all of the money that came from government to businesses, or are we sitting on any?
All of the mandatory grants have been passed to businesses that have applied and that were deemed eligible. We still carry a balance on the discretionary grant fund, which we need to distribute by the 31st of March 2022. So this is administered along with Invest SK to businesses that are deemed eligible. So there's been a number of schemes that have been set up for specific businesses that have been impacted by COVID but weren't covered by the business grants, the compulsory business grant scheme.
Thank you, Chair. Some questions. On page 89, we're talking about the remuneration of senior employees. If you look at the last line of that page about the monitoring officer, it appears to my ill-informed mind that we haven't paid a monitoring officer last year. Is that because the wage falls beneath the threshold? In which case, how come it fell above the threshold in 2019-20?
It's on the line above. So it's because we had two monitoring officers in 2019-20. So we have to show them as separately on this statement.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. It doesn't appear to show our former Assistant Director of Growth, who left, dare I say, in a hurry.
This note doesn't include assistant directors. It only includes directors and above.
Is that threshold based on the job title or the threshold of pay?
It's just strategic officers that are in, just see people that are classed as senior employees, which are strategic officers. All of the officers are included under note 9. Under note 9, on page 88 rather, under note 12. So that gives a summary of how many officers fell into each category. So that's other officers that remuneration was £50,000 or more.
So if I've understood that correctly, by comparing and contrasting paragraph 12 on page 88 with paragraph 13 on page 90, we had 3 officers who earned between £40,000 and £60,000 a year, and their exit packages were worth 173. So about a year's wages for each. Have I done that wrong?
Sorry, which note are you referring to?
I'm looking at paragraph 12, officer remuneration band 60,000. Sorry. Oh no, sorry, it doesn't go down that far. Sorry, yeah. I'm trying to work out where the £173,000 mentioned on page 90 in the termination benefits is. So the total termination benefits for the whole council was £390,000 the year before and £307,000 last year. And of that £307,000, there were no senior staff exit packages, but there were 173,000 shared between those who had a wage of £40,000 to £60,000.
No, that's the bracket, that's the exit package cost band. So there were 4 people that received between 40 and 60,000.
Yes, and their total exit package was £170,000. So 173,000 divided by 4 is just over £40,000. So as an average, the average settlement package with each of those was between 6 months and a year's wages, yeah?
Yes, potentially.
It's hard just it's hard to draw that direct conclusion because it's not as simple as taking one figure, dividing it by the other, because of course each of those exit payments would be slightly different depending on the circumstances. So it wouldn't be as simple as one divided by the other.
Yes, but the average would indicate that some were higher than others. So some would have been very high. My point is basically that I was intrigued by the £173,000, which made up more than half of the £307,000. Going from there to page, going from there to Invest SK, where would I find the exit packages for staff who left Invest SK during that period?
I think as Alison explained, Invest SK do not feature. These are the accounts of the authority, not of Invest SK. So they do not feature within this. Any payments relating to the staffing of Invest SK would be funded from the funding allocation that's given between the council and the company.
Yes, but through you, Chair, the legal requirements for reporting of Invest SK, since it's wholly owned by the local authority, the legal requirements would surely be to explain the same situation. So, so you're saying that if a member of staff leaves Invest SK on one of these salary packets and gets an exit package, the public can't find out how much that was. Is that what you're saying?
Employees of Invest SK are employed by Invest SK, so any arrangements between those staff and that company are dealt with by the company, not by the council.
But is it not? Are they not obliged to report that in their end of year accounting statements?
They would conform to Companies House requirements in terms of their accounts. So whatever requirements they need to meet, they will be featuring in their accounts.
Thank you. I'll pick this up offline if necessary. I'll happily give way if it's on the same subject.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Baxter. I maybe I can help to clarify that. Invest SK, because of their turnover is so low, they are regarded as what Companies House call a small company, and small companies only have to provide abbreviated accounts. So that's why when you go onto the Companies House website and you see the Invest SK accounts, they are so brief. Because I think it isn't the threshold sort of 2 million before they move out of small company. So as a company develops, when it's fairly small, Companies House don't impose too many reporting restrictions on it. As the turnover increases, they have to do more and more. So the moment Invest SK's turnover is below the 2 million threshold, so therefore they can take advantage of the Companies House and legislation in the Companies Act to call themselves a small company and can provide only legally obliged to provide abbreviated accounts. So that's why the accounts you see in the website are so brief.
So thank you. I mean, I give way to colleagues' expertise. However, Invest SK don't spend any money that isn't public money. So I think they're subject to the same rules, but I'll pick it up offline. Going to page 130, I was going to ask about Gravitas Housing. I still can't find within the report where the details of Gravitas are. Can you tell me which page will show me how much Gravitas has spent and lost, or spent and gained, or spent and kept broken in?
Page 143 onwards, the group accounts. So that is the all of the core statements have been reproduced for Gravitas and the council, and there are notes that support those. So notes G1 and G2 and G3 support those accounts.
Okay, I'll take it away as homework. Page 76. Can you show me where in the balance sheet is St Martin's Park and things like St Martin's Park?
They'll be included under property, plant and equipment, or property, plant and equipment, and note 18 provides further details to that, which is on page 24. So St Martin's Park will form part of the assets under construction figure.
I'm on page.
Sorry, page 96. Sorry, it's because we've got different page numbers. Yeah.
I'm on page 96/24.
So
how far
you've got
down?
the property, plant and equipment. And so at the very end column, assets under construction is where the part of that will be St Martin's Park.
Smashing, thank you. I won't ask whether receiving ownership of the Margaret Thatcher statue affects our accounts at all. That would be political. But I would ask about the governance statement. Are we expected to comment on the governance statement here and now, Chair, or is that a separate agenda item?
Yeah, separate. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your answers. I'm sorry if I've machine gunned you, but your defences are well in order, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Asking the question? Well, yeah. Go on then.
Thank you. Yeah, it's page 61, going back to the COVID response. We've got particularly important statement that 631 homeless people were provided with accommodation. Is there any funding left to continue that support? And if so, where was it shown?
The council receives funding for homelessness and rough sleeping on an annual basis, and it will sit within the budget report under housing.
Which page are we looking at, and how much have we got left? Do we have anything left?
This is the statement of account, so it doesn't provide that information.
Thank you.
Yes,
Sorry,
Councillor
just to help Councillor Morgan, these are the sort of things that FedCo have been discussing, and this is the area that FedCo, this is the historical look back at the fight last year.
Wanda, thank you.
I'll have to put the microphone on. Can we support the recommendation 1 on page 51 and recommendation 2, which Richard quoted in his speech earlier about the meeting?
Just for the benefit of the tape, Mr. Chairman, is it worth just reiterating exactly what that second recommendation is, so we're all clear when members vote, that they're clear on what they're voting on? Did you get any of it done?
Well, that's what I was asking you to read out, which you're supposed to have given it to me.
Okay. The delegation be given to the council section 151 officer in consultation with the chairman of the Governance and Audit Committee and the cabinet member for finance and resources to accept the external audit plan and to complete the necessary audit risk assessment in readiness for the audit.
Thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to propose both of those recommendations. Thank you.
I'll second them. All those in favour? I think that is unanimous. That'll make a change. Thank you very much. And we'll move on to the next item. Agenda item 7, which is the, when I can find it, it's a long way through the pack. There we are.
Chair, I was told about a minute ago that we were going to be talking about the annual governance statement. It's not on the agenda.
Well, it is, isn't it?
What number is it on the agenda then?
Mr. Chairman, if I can help, it's part of agenda item 6.
Yeah.
I think we might have rolled that into a separate item.
Well, I haven't got it as a separate item, but obviously it ought to have been. Let's put it like that.
Well, we haven't voted on it as far as I'm concerned, or discussed it for that matter.
Well, that is mainly what the leader and the chief executive present. So that is part and parcel of the account.
Where are the leader and the chief executive?
Mr. Chairman, if I can help, in the introductory paper for item 6, there's a specific paragraph at 1.6 which references the annual governance statement and explains exactly what that statement is. It is part of the core statements of the draft statement of accounts. So I think Councillor Baxter wished to specifically reference it. And in my comments, I actively encourage the committee to comment on it to make sure that in terms of the minutes and for audit, that the committee has had opportunity to comment and feedback any references or changes they want to make. As I said, it is the draft statement and the final statements will be prepared for the September meeting, but it is important this committee, being charged with governance, are satisfied that the draft statement reflects the annual governance framework for 2021. Thank you.
Does that answer your point, Ashley? No, I don't suppose it does. Well, before you come in, I've got the vote.
Yes, my apologies. I think I might have misled, because I did want to ask some questions on the annual governance statement. So I think possibly can, because it is a draft document and we're only going to make some recommendations. I mean, I was just going to talk about on page 182, which is which is COVID-19. That sort of second paragraph down on the right-hand side, which goes, it should be noted that in some cases the use of virtual meetings necessitated a change in process or protocol. I'm actually thinking that refers back to the change of, that the planning, because I was speaking to a couple of members of the planning committee, they kind of alluded to the fact that the 5-day waiting period came apart as part of COVID and there was reaction to that because of the nature of virtual meetings. But upon reading the Constitution, that right was already in there, regardless of COVID. So I wanted a bit of clarification around that, because to me it was kind of saying that there'd been a change in process or protocol, but from my reading of the Constitution, that process and protocol was already there. So there wasn't necessarily a change, because you can't change something that's already there. So that would be my first point. And my second point is was just really to sort of point to the fact that some of this document refers to the Constitution review, which potentially should have been completed by now, but unfortunately because of timing hasn't. So some of those dates are now incorrect. Specifically on page 184 of the follow-up on last year, where it says that the Constitution review is due for completion by September 2021. Well, it won't be now. It's more likely to be May 2022. And actually, if you look on the next page, page 113, when again we talk about the completion of the Constitution, we got a completely different date this time, which says December 2021. And again, what I'm saying there is it's more likely to be May 2022 because so my plan would be to take the final constitution to the next meeting of the next AGM of the council next May, which is when the review will be completed. So just a few sort of comments there, Mr. Chairman, just to make the documents accurate. Thank you.
Well, it was only a draft document and I'm sure by September it will be updated. Ashley, come in then.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure on one of those training courses we've all been sent on, it was talking about the importance of the annual governance statement and how it's a crucial part within our accounting process. So looking at it, it's a review, it seems, of last year's activities by the council. Where is the mention of the council's ambition to build leisure centres and to improve, where is the mention of the leisure transformation strategy that has, in my opinion, made no progress at all? Where is the mention of the housing, other than in the pink box on page 185? There is no mention of the awful housing discoveries that were made last year, the referral to the housing regulator, the referral to the health and safety executive and so on. I can't see that mentioned in this report. And there is no mention of St Martin's Park, I don't think, which is the biggest investment that the council has made for a long, long while. And I can see the 3 external companies mentioned, but I can't see the gravitas mentioned. And one of these companies are not all equal. The Invest SK, which has had its wings clipped considerably, I'm not sure if the text reflects what the council has done with Invest SK, but Environment SK is a technical company where the other ones are not necessarily technical companies. Any thoughts I'd like to ask that to the authors of the report.
So with regards to
Councillor Adams,
the annual governance statement, obviously this is an annual governance statement and it shows how the council has complied with the charter, the SIPFA Solace framework. All your other points really reference the corporate plan more than the annual governance statement, because this is a review of last year with regards to the framework from SIPFA.
That would make sense if we weren't putting lovely pictures of Wyndham Park in and saying how we've had a consultation on Hackney carriages.
With regards to what you're saying, if you read the principles C and D and the principles E, where they relate to those areas, that is the principles and that's what's been done with regards to that area and that principle.
Just to help, Mr. Chairman, the SIPFA framework that Councillor Stokes refers to is kind of the template body of how an annual governance statement is formulated. So that's how every local authority produces its annual governance statement. Where there's references to companies and consultation, they're given examples of how the council has met that principle. So it's not supposed to be an exhaustive list of every single event or activity the council's undertaken. It's meant to give the reader a sense of where we can evidence that that principle has been adhered to or met through the activities the council has. So in some reference, there's some references to companies, but it's not deliberately referencing every single one because some aren't relevant to the principle that we're demonstrating against.
So I'd like to concentrate then on the bottom of page 177 or 105, whichever one you're looking at, where we've got a little box that says strategic risks. Number 2 of the strategic risks is the risk of achieving council transformation. Perhaps the risk of not achieving council transformation, but that's a very broad bullet point. I would say that the risks facing the council are not building any houses, not doing anything with leisure transformation, and there's nothing in there about the continued threat of either Brexit or the COVID, the COVID
required.
thing. Well, it may not be required, but
this is a pure thing that is tacked on to the accounts, and it's done by the 2 senior officials here, the leader and the chief executive. And really, we shouldn't necessarily be discussing this. It's part and parcel of the accounts, and it's acceptable that it is their document and it is put through onto the accounts.
If you put items on this agenda, Chair, then I'm going to read them and I'm going to comment on them and I'm going to try and understand them. If you're saying that I don't need to understand it and it's a draft document that we don't need to worry about, then I won't bother. But I'm just saying that there are massive gaps in this. There are massive gaps in this report and they should be addressed.
With all due respect, Councillor Baxter, I think you've been given quite, no, you asked the question, so I'm addressing you. The point is, we've answered your points with regards to why the annual governance statement is there. It's done on a SIPFA basis. We are doing the principles regarding SIPFA. They have the layout and we're fitting in where we've done and we've met them, as the Section 151 officer has said.
If I can help, Mr. Chairman, in terms of the strategic risks that Councillor Baxter references, the committee looked at the risk management framework at its previous meeting. Those thematic headings 1 to 7 are the ones that this committee has approved as part of its strategic risk register. So they're the risks. I don't think members can recall the risk register itself. We have thematic risks down one side, and then we have the controls and the actions that have been undertaken to mitigate those risks, either eliminate them or remove them or reduce those. Those 7 headings are the strategic risks that the committee has previously approved. So this report is not seeking to challenge, change or adopt new risks. It's reflecting back what the strategic risks of the authority are currently as defined by the committee. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Richard. Now, can I refer back? Have we dealt with item 6? Have we voted on that?
Chairman, I understand that the vote was taking place before that discussion. If you wanted to take another vote just to note the document and the comments that were made, then that might.
No, I'm quite happy with the vote having been taken. Thank you. So we'll move on to agenda item 7, the internal audit follow-up report. Tracy Elliott.
If I'll just introduce Mr. Chairman, then I'll hand over. So today we've got Lisa Smith from RSM, who's sitting to our left or to your right, depending on your viewpoint. So Lisa will go through the follow-up report. We've got officers here, and of course Lisa herself can answer any questions that may arise. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you very much, Chair. So if I can direct members to the first report on the agenda item, which is our first follow-up of 21-22. Within this review, we followed up one of our follow-up reports from 2021 and also any actions that were included within the GDPR report. As a result of this, we followed up 24 management actions, 10 medium, 6 low, and 8 of the actions that were included within the GDPR review, which were uncategorised. As a result of the review, we believe that the Council has demonstrated reasonable progress in implementing the actions that were followed up. We confirmed that 62%, so that's a total of 13 of the 24 actions that we followed up, had either been implemented or superseded as controls had been changed, and therefore the original action was no longer relevant. Of the 7 actions that have not been implemented, 4 related to the GDPR review. Of the 3 that were included within the original follow-up report, 1 was medium priority and 2 were low priority. In terms of the actions that are still outstanding from the follow-up review, the first one was a medium priority action that was originally raised within the customer relationship management report from 1920. And we are comfortable with management's responses in terms of ensuring that that action will be implemented by the end of the calendar year. The second one related to the cybersecurity report, which was originally issued in 2017-18. That is only a low priority action point, but again, we're comfortable with the actions that management are proposing to take to ensure that that is implemented by the end of this month. And then the third action, which again is a low priority point, was related to the fire safety report, which was originally issued in 2018-19. And again, management have confirmed that action will be taken to ensure that that is implemented by the end of July. In relation to the GDPR follow-up action points, again, we've discussed with management in terms of ensuring that a realistic timeframe is being agreed for the implementation of those outstanding actions. Some of them do take us into next year, so February 2022, for example, but these are reflective of the nature of the actions that are needed to be implemented and the time that it is going to take management to actually ensure that appropriate processes and procedures are put in place. Happy to take any specific questions that members might have on that report.
Yes, I'm just wondering why it takes such a long time to action your recommendations. I mean, you're talking there 31st of December. Is that a reasonable request?
In terms of the GDPR actions, yes, we believe that is a reasonable timeframe. Implementing anything in relation to GDPR and making sure that those processes and procedures are embedded across the council is a significant ask of members and of management. So we are comfortable that as long as management do implement those actions, that the risk that the council is exposed to in relation to those areas will be mitigated. In relation to the data disposal module that we identified as the customer relationship review, again, we're just waiting for actually that module to be installed. So again, once that module is installed, we're comfortable that that should be addressed as well.
Mark Whittington.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, Lisa, for the report. I just want a bit of clarification. I'm referring to page 204 of the report pack, which is it relates to the council implementing the new Civica module for the handling of FOI and complaint requests. The first one is everything else seems to have a priority, and that one doesn't. But I'm also I'm vice chairman of the Finance, Economic Development and Corporate Committee, and at our meeting earlier this week, we around complaint requests. Certainly, we received reports on complaints and on the new complaint system. I can't remember Civica module being mentioned there. I don't know if I've misunderstood or misinterpreted something, because there may be an officer here who's got the background knowledge on that. But so I'm not putting you on the spot, but just wondering if an officer can possibly advise or take something back. Thank you.
I can help on that, Mr. Chairman. Civica is obviously our corporate customer relationship management solution, which sits across the organisation. They offer and provide a customer complaints handling tool software. So that's hence why Civica has been referenced in this document. The report that we received earlier this week was to look at the whole complaints procedure on the back of the housing complaints procedure being adopted by Cabinet the week before, and it actually was silent on the preferred software provider. So I think the report this week kind of supersedes the audit work. So the audit work at the time was referencing the strong preference would be to use the existing incumbent customer relationship management solution, but the report this week was suggesting there may be others that are perhaps more suitable for the organisation.
Clarifies the situation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions from the committee members? I understand Councillor Morgan would like to speak. Not quite sure why, but carry on.
Thank you. Right, can you explain on page 195 of the report why we've decided that the completion of the surveys of sheltered accommodation and flats for communal facilities, the stay put policy, which needs amending for each property, is a low priority, given that relates to fire safety. And it looks like it hasn't actually been implemented nor completed.
Apologies, councillor, I'll have to take that action away and do some more investigations as to why that was agreed as a low priority in the first place.
Would you like to come in on that, Richard?
Well, just to say in terms of context, of course, appreciate Lisa's only here for today's committee, but that categorisation of that would have been set by, well, would have been recommended by RSM and adopted by the committee some months ago. This is obviously a follow-up, which is where the auditors are coming in to follow up on actions and recommendations previously approved by the committee. So that's not that's not a priority that's been given as part of this report. It's something that would have been given many months previously.
I'm concerned about that in the sense, obviously, should something happen, this is a report that we produced and would be in the public domain. And ultimately, I would imagine it's our decision, our responsibility, the actual action within that. So if I could just request that is revisited.
As the recommendation, as the report says that will effectively be done in 10 days' time, then I can ask the director and the cabinet member for that area to reassure the committee that that date's been met and the policy has been amended accordingly, and then allay any concerns that one may have gone beyond the agreed date.
Thank you, Richard. There being no other questions, I'd like to move the recommendation on page 187. Have I a seconder?
I'll second that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. We'll now go on to agenda item 8. I think this is Lisa again.
Thank you very much, Chair. So if members can just move on to page 211 of the pack, just in terms of some key messages since the previous governance and audit group meeting. We've finalised 3 reports with management, one relating to disabled facilities grant, the first continuous assurance review for the council, and then the follow-up report, which we've just discussed. In terms of assignments for the rest of the year, all of those dates have been agreed with management, and we're in the process of starting the individual planning for each of those reviews. And just to highlight to members, we have been requested to make 2 changes to the internal audit plan since the previous meeting. One was in relation to undertaking a follow-up of cash handling, and then also to undertake an audit of income and banking. That's basically replacing a review of repairs stock on the basis that the department no longer holds any stock, so undertaking a review in that area would not demonstrate any value to the council. In terms of the reports, I will come on to those when we come to the relevant part of the report. And then in terms of Appendix A, again, that's just highlighting where we are in terms of progress against the overall plan for the year. The income and banking report is currently with management for review and comment, as is the local authority searches report. Just to highlight to members as well, in terms of other assurance activity that we are currently undertaking, we are carrying out the housing benefit grant validation review. That work has started and is due to conclude by the end of this month. But again, happy to take any specific questions that members might have on that element of the report before I move on to each individual executive summary.
Thank you. Yes, I have a question on the land searches, which we know has gone somewhere else. And it says an average of 22 working days. Have they been found to be improving or not?
I could probably help on that. The internal audit, I mean, it's still a draft report, isn't it? And I don't know if they're dwelling too much on performance per se. They're more concerned with the control framework. This committee referred it on to the finance committee for further work and review, didn't they? And I believe it's on the work program, Vice Chair. I think it's on the work programme for the Finance Committee to pick that up. So I guess there'll be a report in due course going to that committee.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks, Rich. Yes, I am the Vice Chair FEDCO. As you're probably aware, there are an awful lot of items on our work programme still to be scheduled. Myself and the Chairman, Councillor Graham Gill, are going to be meeting in the next couple of days to kind of agree the prioritisation of those outstanding items. There is a potential that we are discussing that we may have an additional meeting of FEDCO probably around October to try and clear some of the backlog and then maybe review in another few months and the possibility of possibly a second additional one early spring next year just to clear some of this backlog. But the probably search answer is on that list still of items still to be scheduled. Thank you.
Sue Woolley.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm at a bit of a loss on the DFGs. What was your remit for completing this this audit? Because I'm being really mean and rude, but it tells me nothing. What I want it to tell me is how long it took from referral to the OT, and then from the OT to get the work being placed. You know, again, delays, timescales, etc., etc. So this, to me, is exceedingly lightweight. And it's, I mean, is it our fault for not asking you to look into it? I want to know if that allocation of DFG funding has been spent every year. The 15 sampled, was that 15 out of 500? Or was it a case of, well, they were the only ones that we could lay our hands on because, you know, it takes so long, etc., etc. So, you know, where does the fault lie? Is it ours for not asking you?
Thank you, Councillor. In terms of the way that we undertake each of these reviews, we hold a scoping meeting with the executive lead responsible for the specific area that we're undertaking the review in. That then leads to us developing an assignment planning sheet which outlines the scope of the areas that we are and we are not going to look at. An action that I can take away is to make sure that when we're having those planning discussions, we are challenging management in terms of what are the concerns that councillors might have in this particular area as to why this particular review has been included on the internal audit plan. And then we can ensure that the scope is tailored accordingly to make sure that your concerns are noted and taken forward.
Thank you. That's obviously a very polite way of saying, yes, the ball's in our court, it's our fault. But, you know, it really, with colleagues, I would say, I know just enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be useful, that we wasted money here because we could have got so much more out of this. And would this then go to the finance FEDCO at all? No. Right, so I think that it's just something, it's a learning point, but thank you for your honesty.
Ashley Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. I'm trying to learn from my previous missing out of a chunk of the report before the vote. Are we talking about pages 216 onwards yet, or is there more to come from the guest speaker? Yes, but within agenda item.
So, yeah, sorry, Councillor, just to clarify, I was just asking if there were any specific comments up to page 214 of the pack before I moved on to discuss the results of each of the individual reviews.
My questions relate to page 214 onwards, so I'll wait for the second episode.
Mark Whittington.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thanks, Lisa. I'm just referring to page 213 and a couple of the or audits haven't as yet been commenced. The housing compliance one and the council subsidiary companies. I see the audit date as has been agreed, and my slight concern is that with those two, I suspect potentially it could be both quite substantial items on the plan, and I'm just really just to get some assurance that you think that you can have enough time with both of those items to sort of give them, because I think certainly the first one is a major issue, obviously, in the councils, and the second one on the council subsidiary companies, obviously that also causes quite a number of issues as well. Just some reassurance that within the plan there's plenty of time to give them the time that they both need. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I believe that there is sufficient time included within the internal audit plan to focus on those key areas. I will take that away and ensure that I pick up with Amjad Ali in terms of where we are on the planning of those. And I will again highlight your concerns in terms of ensuring that they are given sufficient time to ensure that we do get into them in sufficient depth.
I can also add to the assurance, if it's needed, that all of the planned activities are scheduled in throughout the year. They're in accordance with the budgeted allocated days between ourselves and RSM, and indeed planning sheets already with the authority on the two that you've referenced. So they are in diaries and they will happen.
Thank you, Chair. So shall I pick up from page 216 of the pack in terms of the Disabled Facilities Grants Executive Summary? Again, noting the previous councillors' concerns and comments in relation to the depth of this review, we did undertake a sample of 15 of overall applications that we received and didn't identify any issues or areas of concern. All of the referrals were received appropriately from the occupational therapist. The means testing was undertaken as required, and any funds that were necessary for the individual to pay were received. All of the work was approved, and we did identify one instance where actually the application wasn't progressed at the request of the applicant. So again, as a result of this review, we didn't have to actually agree any actions with management. So we're comfortable that actually the processes in that area that we looked at as part of this review were operating effectively and were well designed. But happy to take any questions on that bit.
Councillor Baxter.
Thank you. Do you know, I realise that you focus on the bits that you focus on. You've chosen 15 applications. Do you know how many applications we have go through? Because the final one of your key findings relates to what Councillor Woolley said earlier on. And that is a kind of fear of a concrete life jacket quality assurance measure. Yes, we monitor the budget. Undoubtedly, we monitor the budget. We monitor the budget at every time it comes to FEDCO, and we say, this budget looks massively underspent. We've been trying to find out for a long time why that budget is massively underspent. One of the possible reasons is that people don't know about it, or the process takes too long, or there's a gap in the system. One of my suspicions at one point was about how long it takes to go through the occupational therapist. Can you offer an opinion on, I wouldn't ask you to offer an opinion on why the budget is underspent, but an opinion on the customer journey, I suppose. How long does it take, that with the 15 that you investigated, how long was it from the date of application to the date of installation? And yeah, and why is our budget underspent so regularly on something that you would think would be a high take-up?
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to take that question away, Councillor. I wasn't closely involved in this particular review, so I don't have that information to hand unless colleagues within the council can actually answer that question on my behalf.
Sue Woolley.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll use this as a stock example, but I'm sure we're not the only council that you do work for. So there must be, and the DFGs is a good example, it's a pretty solid procedure. You know, the money comes in to the upper tier, it gets passported through to this council, and then it's spent appropriately. So I'm surprised that you haven't already got a bit of a template, if I'm honest, to try and tease out the questions. But I mean, how would we benchmark? How can we benchmark whether we're doing a good job or not on this? How can we quality assure on this report? And I think the answer is, well, we can't really. But I go back to the point that it's obviously the ball's in our court to make sure that we ask you to delve into some more pertinent questions. Yeah, thank you.
Mark Whittington.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks again, Lisa. From going back to the complaints again on page 224, the final item, and reading through this, I mean, that kind of does praise it quite well, the report that came to FEDCO at the start of the week, you know, the issues we've got with our existing complaint system. But they obviously, you know, you spoke to management, and the target date there has given us the 30th of September. In view of the fact that FEDCO only agreed to agreed to pass the project implementation document, the PID, for the new complaints procedure at the start of the week, I'm just wondering now if that target date for implementation, the 30th of September, is somewhat optimistic in the light of that, because certainly I know at our next meeting of FEDCO in early September, we're due to get a progress report back on implementation, and also we'd requested a revised PID, because there are a number of issues and concerns that the members of FEDCO raised about items that weren't on the PID. And as I say, I've just have real issues, concerns now that actually that target date may be slightly optimistic and potentially it could be a bit later on in the year. But obviously I probably wouldn't expect you to answer that, Lisa, but because obviously you're not aware of anything going internally, but this is really more for officers. Thank you.
I think also, yeah, just to add to that, Mr. Chairman, clearly the outcome of Tuesday's discussion was to bring a further report back to September. I think the report on Tuesday was written on the hope, if you like, that PID would be signed off and they would go away and implement the system, but clearly the committee wanted some more information, which is why it's been asked to come back further. I just also wonder if the wording of the action is quite deliberate, because it doesn't talk about a system, it talks about a recording mechanism. So I wonder if that's deliberate, because there might be a short-term hybrid solution that could be implemented quite quickly that just captures that issue on the basis that then develop the implementation. But it's a good point to note that there's a sequence in here that's probably slightly out of step because of what happened at the committee on Tuesday, which obviously supersedes the document we've got today. But I'll make sure the officers concerned are aware of that.
Ashley Baxter.
Is there more to come?
Sorry?
Is there more to come? Because Councillor Whittington just asked a question about a piece of the paper that I wasn't aware that we'd been reported on yet.
I don't think so. You ask your question.
Sorry, Chair, would you like me to just quickly go through the highlights of the continuous assurance visit, which I think that the council has just referred to in terms of his latest question. This is the first continuous assurance visit that we've actually undertaken for the council. The process that we follow is to identify some key controls with management that we will test throughout the year to ensure that those controls are designed effectively and are operating as intended. So the 10 areas that we agreed on were in relation to the land searches, planning applications, purchase orders and invoicing, supplier bank accounts, etc. So those are considered to be the key controls across the council that you need assurance on are operating effectively over the full calendar year. We identified 5 areas of non-compliance, 2 where we agreed low priority action points in relation to land searches and housing repairs. Those 2 low priority action points have a common theme in terms of ensuring that guidance documents are available for individuals responsible in their area so that they're aware of timelines So again, coming back to one of the earlier comments around how long does it actually take? What's a reasonable time frame for land searches to be turned around? What's a reasonable time frame for housing repairs to be responded to? We did also identify and agree 3 medium priority actions with management. The first medium priority action in relation to changes that are processed to a supplier bank account details. And what we identified there was that there was no evidence that appropriate checks had been carried out in all instances to confirm that that was a valid change, and the supplier really had requested that change to be made. The second medium priority action point was in relation to new starters to the council, where we identified 2 instances where appropriate ID checks and right to work checks hadn't been carried out. The council is investigating those as we speak to ensure that there is no risk in relation to those 2 particular issues. And then, as we've already referred to, the medium priority action point in relation to complaints, which again relate to having an out-of-date policy and then not actually having a dashboard so that those response times can be monitored. But again, happy to take any specific questions.
Thank you. Yes, I thought we'd gone through all that before. Obviously, back to front. Richard.
Just before members have questions on this, I just wanted to set the context. This is the first time the council and RSM have worked together on a continuous assurance basis, and I think it's been very successful because it's where the committee, alongside officers, have asked the auditors to go delving into areas that traditionally we may have had concerns about, or we may want to seek assurance that the controls are as they should be. Now, clearly, it's come out almost 50-50. There is further work to do in some areas, but some areas also have stood up to their testing. So it's not a surprise, I think, that on their first review, there's going to be 4 of these. The first review, they've identified some areas for improvement, but the committee, I would suggest we were expecting that because there are headings on there that we know aren't quite where they need to be. So I think it's very helpful because the auditors have highlighted back to us where improvements need to be made. And I think all the areas have responded positively to that. And you can see there are very specific actions that have been agreed to or indeed have already been implemented. So I think the direction of travel around this will be a positive one. And when audit come back in 12 weeks' time and reassess those controls, then hopefully the feedback to the committee next time will be a far more healthier picture of robustness against them. Thank you.
Sue Wally.
Thank you, Chairman. Pleased to hear what Richard said, because on the face of it, the bank account scenario, that's only a couple of months and you found 3 wobbles. Can you just tell me, if you know off the top of your head, were they all related to COVID payments or details, or were these suppliers ongoing suppliers? And then I'll do the other one whilst I'm at it. The new starters, that's a bit of a vague term. I mean, I would jump to assume that you mean people who have joined the council as literally a new starter. But are you talking about new starters as far as taxi drivers are concerned, or you are? You're not.
Sorry, thank you for the questions, councillor. In terms of the supplier bank accounts, they were regular suppliers, so it wasn't in relation to COVID payments. These were where suppliers had contacted the council and said, we've changed our bank account details, can you please update your records? And we couldn't see that actually in all instances, those had been followed up. In terms of the new starters, we are talking about individuals who have joined the council as employees, so not taxi drivers. No. No.
Sorry, could I just follow up on that point? The new process was put in place in June, and this audit was retrospective, so it didn't audit the new process, it was auditing what we were currently doing. We've now got a process in place which requires 2 officers to check the bank details that have been put in. They have to document it, they have to document who they spoke to at the business, which was a process we had in place before, but it just wasn't being fully documented. It was prior to COVID, but then because people have been working remotely, an amended process had not been put in place, but that now has since been, it is now being acted on since June.
Ashley Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the auditor and to the finance staff that have obviously worked with the auditor and present a very glass half full approach to responding to the complaints. But when you look at page 220, where we've got the list of 10 areas which were inspected, and they're all, if I've understood it correctly, these are all things that we've looked at before, and 50% of them are non-compliant. Now, even if we've never looked at them before, even if we've never done a spot check on bank account details, one is too many. All these 5 areas where we have, to use an old-fashioned word, failed, all these areas where we have failed are customer-facing services. And when someone has an interaction with the council and the council doesn't meet its own or the legal criteria, then that reflects very badly on the council and the councillors and the officers and local government in general. It is unacceptable. To go to the specifics, for example, the starters, I mean, we bang on at full council about the importance of tackling human slavery and so on. We can't even check that our own workers are qualified to work for us. And okay, it's only 2 out of 10, but I think one in 5 new starters not having their details checked properly, and then people not having their bank accounts checked properly in this day and age where we're getting texts all the time, either advertising scams or perpetrating scams. Really, we should know better. And then the housing repairs, we've just flagellated ourselves and reported ourselves to the housing regulator about housing and how it needs to turn around. And then we've got the auditors doing a sample between April 21 and May 21, saying, oh, sorry, I've read the wrong page. Yeah, between April 21 and May 21, saying we still can't manage our housing repairs properly. It's a very poor show.
If I can just come back, Mr. Chairman, and kind of build on what I said at the start, which is where the committee has deliberately asked RSM to go into areas that the committee knows and the officers know isn't quite where they need to be. They're work in progress. 3 of the 5 that's been referenced, we know there's problems with land charges because we've talked about it last time, and the Finance Committee have got it on their work programme. We know housing repairs isn't perfect. We know we've got an ongoing improvement and action plan. So this is monitoring that direction of travel. So we wouldn't expect full compliance with our control framework because we know there are weaknesses. We know there's problems with the complaint system. Councillor Whittington's referenced it a few times this afternoon. So that there are 3 of the 5 that, to be honest, we're not surprised they've come back and said they're not meeting the full controls, because they are areas that this committee is rightly focused on and will continue to focus on. So we're not surprised. And I think in terms of where, you know, it's not a perfect world. This isn't a perfect control framework across the entire area, and we need to improve. But as Alison said as part of her response, yeah, we are still playing catch up to some extent on how officers are working remotely, and the control framework can't simply be picked up from this building and put into all our working practices where we've got dispersed workforce across the entire area. So there will be issues where perhaps officers haven't worked as diligently as they had previously, and they thought somebody else is picking up an issue that they should have been picking up. So we are continuing to learn. So I don't think, you know, perhaps I'm a glass half full person, but I take this in the spirit in which it's been produced. And as I've said it earlier, it's a direction of travel report. We expect to see improvement, of course we do. But we also have to accept that in some areas it's not perfect where we want it to be. But that's the whole purpose of Audit working with us.
Thank you, Richard. Charmaine Morgan.
I didn't like to interrupt your flow. I'd like to go back to, if I may, the DFG work, page 216 and 217. Can you clarify, though I appreciate we might have an issue with this given another task, which is looking at complaints process. But do we actually examine the complaints process to see if there are any complaints relating to the areas that you're checking? Because it seems, looking at this, we picked up 15 cases and followed them all the way through. Councillor Baxter commented on the underspend in this budget area, which is on the same committee as me there, and we frequently raise that concern. Did we also look at a test run just to see how the officers, if someone rang up in a test scenario, given it would be hard otherwise to do it, just to see how they actually communicate what's available to the person concerned? It's one thought I noticed is a lot on here about dependency on online communication, and very potentially the people in this group needing our support may not have access to online, or may have all sorts of other issues or needs.
Thank you, councillor. As far as I'm aware, we didn't actually do a walkthrough of the process, so we didn't make an inquiry of our own to see how officers would have approached that kind of online inquiry or telephone inquiry. But as I referred to earlier with the previous councillor's question, that is something that we will take away and make sure that that is addressed in any future reviews that we undertake, so that we are making sure that the reviews that we are doing are really adding value to the council and pulling out if there are any key themes.
I think that concludes agenda item 8. It's really just for noting. And we'll move on to agenda item 9, the 2021 Treasury Management Annual Report. Alison Hall Wright. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Chairman. As I explained to you earlier, I do have to leave now, and I apologise for that.
That's fine. No problem.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. I've just, because I've got the work papers from Fedco here as well. I'll speak to Graham when we're deciding on our work programme and suggest the DFG, because it does seem to be a recurrent thing that seems to be coming up on a periodic basis, about adding that onto our work programme. As I say, I think we've probably got enough here for 2 additional meetings. I can't guarantee when, but I think it's recurring enough now. I think we can do something about it, Mr. Chairman.
That's fine, I think. Agenda item 9. Alison Hall Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the annual Treasury report. It's the 3rd report which has been presented throughout the last year. Well, it concludes last year. The council had to meet the SIPA code of practice on treasury management and the Prudential Code for capital finance in local authorities. The council is required to produce 3 reports throughout the year. We have an annual treasury strategy which was approved by council on the 2nd of March 2020. We have a mid-year treasury update report which was presented to this committee on the 19th of November 2020. And then we have this report, which gives a summary of the investment activity throughout the year. So if we turn to page 227, the table on this page provides details of the debt the council had at the 31st of March 2021 compared with March 2020. Each year we have a self-financing loan that sits with the HRA. Each year we pay £3.2 million of this loan, hence it reducing between the years. And we held investments of 68.26 million compared with 55.15 million. But as I mentioned earlier, this relates to balances of Section 31 grants that were received in relation to COVID. The debt the council holds is split between short term and long term. So we have £3.2 million, which will be repayable this year, and then 89 million, which is repayable in the long term. The council complied with its policy to not hold 35%, more than 35% of its investments, long-term investments. Our long-term investments related to a £1.12 million investment with Gravitas and a £3 million investment in the CCLA property fund. Members will remember from previous reports that the property fund invests in property, so the value of the investment can fluctuate as the value of property fluctuates, but we do receive a quarterly dividend payment. The council do view this as a long-term investment. We entered into it for a minimum of 5 years to manage the risk of fluctuations. So the value of the investment was £2.7 million at the 31st of March 2021. But as I said previously, the primary reason for entering into this investment was the annual dividends we would receive. And last financial year, we received £117,000 dividend, which is approximately a 3.9% return on investment. As a total, we received £420,000 of investment interest. So this dividend actually formed 27% of the interest received, because most of our investments rates range currently between 0.01% and 0.25% due to the impact that COVID's had on interest rates. The graph on page 228 shows the institutions the council held investments with at the 31st of March. The council has recommended investment limits with each institution, which are approved as part of the Treasury strategy each year. And this ensures we have a diversified portfolio which spreads risk. And the graph at the top of page 229 shows the duration of the investments. So most of our investments were held for less than 91 days, which helps with support cash flow. All investments were placed in line with the Treasury strategy throughout the year. And Appendix 1 of the report details the performance against the prudential and Treasury indicators. So I can confirm that throughout the year, the repayment of all principal has been secured in all deposits. So all investments have been returned to the council when they matured. The council's cash liquidity requirements has been met throughout the year. And this has been, we've monitored cash flow as part of the COVID response. Investment income levels have exceeded the amended budget, but this is because investment levels were higher than we originally estimated, but that primarily relates to the additional Section 31 grants, and performance indicators that were set for 2021 have been achieved. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
There are not many of us left, is there? Councillor Mark Whittington.
Thanks, Alison. I've got three questions, but thanks for the report. It's a really, as usual, a really good in-depth report. Actually, my first question is more of a compliment, and you alluded to it in your closing comments around the volatility in cash this year. You know, and obviously, you know, it's I think it's a testament to great work they're doing, a very, very, shall I say, fluid time for cash, that you've been able to manage it all very well. So that's really a compliment. And I know Fedco have been received some very good cash flow forecasts at our meetings during the year. So many thanks for that. My first sort of question is on page 227, where we sort of look at the net borrowing position we're at. And I know that at the moment, our policy, if we're sort of doing borrowing now, is we sort of always do internal. If we put, in the sort of overall borrowing, is there still any sort of historic external borrowing in there that's still sort of being paid for in terms of interest payments, or is that all coming towards an end? My first question. And just another comment, that the rate of return on the CCLA property fund of 3.9% 9%. I mean, that's fantastic, given that interest rates, as you've alluded to, are so low. So I think that's really, really good. And my second question. Did I have my second? My second question. Did I have my second question? Did I have my second question? I think I kind of know. I think actually it was two compliments and one question. Thank you.
Thank you. All of the borrowing we currently have, the external borrowing, all relates to the self-financing borrowing that was taken out in relation to the HRA. So that will be repaid over. I can look at the statement of accounts and confirm what period that will be repaid over. So yeah, that's the only external borrowing we currently have that incurs interest.
Just to comment on that in terms of the general fund, at the moment, St Martin's Park and the acquisition of the site in Grantham are both financed through internal borrowing. So there will be a requirement in due course to undertake external borrowing to finance that, but at the moment they're not reflected in these figures.
Right. So potentially you'll have to, in order to finance the cash payments, you would have to go out and borrow externally at some point. Yes.
Just to confirm, the maturity of the external borrowing is on page 111 of the agenda reports pack, or 39 of the statement of accounts.
Are we all happy with the report? And can I move the recommendation at the bottom of 225? Have I seconded?
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All those in favour? That's unanimous for all who's here. And we'll carry on to agenda item 10, the outturn position report 2021, which I believe Richard is going to present for the nth time to councillors.
Yeah, apologies, Mr. Chairman, for those members will have heard all this before, because obviously this has been presented to the Finance Committee and also it was presented to Cabinet last week. So I'm not going to rush it, but I'm not. But if you kind of give me a nod that you've heard all this before, you'll have to just tell me. So the outturn report has been compiled using the amended budget framework that was agreed by Council in September. So actually the variances and the differences between the outturn and the budgets are slightly less than we'd ordinarily expect. Clearly 2021 was pretty turbulent, so it wasn't that long before we asked Council to reset the budgets to reflect the impact the pandemic was having on the budgets from both an income and an expenditure point of view. So actually we're using the amended position to do the comparisons for the financial year. For the general fund, I imagine the headline really is that the councils had managed to achieve a balanced position at the year end by using government grants, which came through to support councils, and there's a list of those in the information at table 6, and also where it's slowed down or suppressed expenditure. So the culmination of a number of actions actually resulted in a balanced position, which puts council in a good position financially going forward. Members will perhaps be aware we were wholly at some point reliant on the stabilisation reserve having to be used to balance everything off at the year end, but as things have panned out, that requirement didn't come to fruition, so therefore the stabilisation reserve remains unscathed and obviously is there for the council to utilise going forward. So the pack in front of you contains full details of the variances and narrative around those variances, so members can deep dive into the detail if they so choose. In terms of one of the requirements this afternoon, I'll be asking you to approve the reserve movements that are being recommended in the report. And one of the key proposals around reserves is to create a COVID recovery reserve, which is from legacy government grant monies that haven't been needed, which are £1.2 million. And Cabinet last week agreed the delegation of that reserve, subject to yourselves formulating it, and that delegation will sit with myself, the Chief Executive, and the Cabinet Member for Finance. And the primary purpose of that reserve will be to deal with and offset any other losses in our income, which we're already starting to see, particularly for Q1, which is unsurprising given the social restrictions that were still in place, but also in terms of whatever happens for the remainder of the year, be it other expenditure pressures or transformation savings not materialising because officers are redeployed onto other activities, or a further deterioration of our income against the current budget. So that reserve has got a very specific purpose. In terms of income, Table 7 sets out the budgets that we set out at the start of the year, and you'll see the amended budget was around about 2.6 million reduction. That's where council deliberately reduced down our income because we knew that car parking income wasn't going to be able to deliver the original levels. We also saw it in our in our art centres, in our markets, and mainly across a number of key headings. The outturn was slightly better than we'd forecast, bearing in mind that was set in September. So our outturn was actually just over 4 million. And in the paragraph above, you'll see the council was able to access just over 650,000 of the government's, what they call the co-payment losses scheme, which is to effectively, subject to all the criteria, but as a headline, the government reimbursed councils for 75 pence out of every pound that was lost as a direct result of the pandemic's impact. So the council made use of that and achieved just over 650. And indeed, as set out in the table above, there are a number of other grants that the council was able to access and to receive, particularly around reopening the high street to help the leisure recovery for Leisure SK, for the cultural recovery, which was the reopening of the art centres, and also to pay passported through to our residents in terms of the winter grant scheme, test and trace scheme, council tax hardship scheme. So fairly unprecedented amounts of money that were coming into the organisation and being used. And you'll appreciate no further resources were allocated to the council to administer and support those volumes of work going through the organisation. And that's just an example of where officers were effectively taken off their ordinary day-to-day role to actually respond to the emergency that the country was facing. And there's clearly on that page alone, nearly £46 million worth of grant that had to be dealt with by the council for that period. So that's just to give you a sense of the activities that were being undertaken. In terms of the capital, obviously the capital was impacted, but to a slightly lesser extent, and you'll see that in table 9. The budget was slightly reduced down to 3.2 million, and the outturn was just over 2.2 million. And again, there is detailed narrative in the appendices to support the variances that I've described. Just turning to the reserves, there's a request to top back up the maintenance reserve. The maintenance reserve is there to fund and respond to unforeseen pressures on our asset base from the general fund due to unexpected costs that may arise during the year. This is on top of the maintenance budgets that sit within the council's core budget. So there's a request to top that back up to 500,000. I've mentioned the COVID recovery reserve, but there's also a request to replenish the IT reserve. We'll know that over last year, there was unprecedented demand on getting laptops out to our staff so they could work safely at home. There was obviously increased pressure on monitors being provided for staff working at home, things like keypads, keyboards, etc., etc. So there's a requirement to fund that, but there's also a requirement now to bring the offices back into use, because clearly some staff were taking home equipment from the offices to enable that home working to be set up with speed. So as if members go around the building now, they'll see some quite empty desks without any kit on them at all. So there's a need to replenish to enable the hybrid model of working from home and working in the offices. And finally, around IT, we need to complete the rollout of the Windows 365 package, which enables us to work on Teams and other forms of communication. So that needs to reach its conclusion. There's also a requirement and request to top up what we call the housing delivery reserve, which is the legacy unspent, we already talked about this afternoon, disabled facilities grant. The council was able to access some more funding closer to the year end in February time of a further 116,000. So we have unspent grant of 362,000, which will go into that disabled facilities grant reserve, which will be to fund. This is over and above the in-year allocation, but it will be to fund where demand exceeds our in-year allocation. So that reserve is there for that primary purpose. We've taken the opportunity to replenish the general fund working balance back up to the level that's in line with its policy. So that also cushions us from day-to-day expenditure fluctuations that no reserves may be able to accommodate. So that working balance is just to cash flow us in the short term if it was ever needed in that way. Just turning to the HRA, one of the bigger variances for the HRA is around the capital. And we talked about this at the Finance Committee this week in terms of the current year, but we left the capital outturn for the HRA with an underspend of just nearly 13 million because of the pause on the new build predominantly, which was the lion's share of the programme for last year. That's had the benefit of keeping the reserves at a relatively stable level. So if you look at the reserve appendices for the HRA, you'll see the opening balance and the closing balance broadly in line with each other. And that's predominantly because the amount that was being spent on those new builds was not at the level that we originally budgeted for. So there are a number of appendices that allow the committee members to deep dive into the detail, but the committee's specific requirements this afternoon is to approve the outturn report in its entirety and specifically approve the reserve movements that I've referenced and are contained in the report itself. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Richard, for yet another detailed report on this. I don't know how you managed to change the wording when you go to different committees. There are three actual recommendations. I've not quite mentioned them, but are there any questions? Yes, Mark.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple, because I know at FedCo earlier in the week we discussed the sort of the 1.2 million COVID reserve that is here and is included within the recommendation that we agreed to. I mean, I think we discussed that potentially during the course of the year that officers will bring back sort of updates as to how we were spending that 1.2 million to keep an eye. I think that's greatly appreciated. My second sort of real question is it's sort of around the sort of property maintenance reserve on page 245. I'm sort of picking up stories from the press and from other places and people I speak to, the sort of construction, the reckon for post-COVID construction costs and building costs are sort of coming in for a lot of things, so 20% high. I'm just wondering potentially if that might have an impact upon any sort of work or potentially building work or maintenance work they'll be likely to do in this year, and just some comment around would the level of reserve then be sufficient if there is potential cost inflation post-COVID? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, it's a good point. I mean, the budgets going back on the timeline will probably set around December, January, which obviously predates a lot of this supply chain pressure as we've seen, and cost of materials and labour significantly above inflation and probably only going one way for the short term. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised that once we go out to tender on some of our big projects, either through maintenance programs or also in terms of new builds and more capital asset construction works, that we find ourselves in a position where the market is demanding a lot more than the budgets are allowing us to proceed with. So in that scenario, I don't think the reserves themselves will be sufficient, and we'll probably need to come back through the financial regulation requirements to seek further approvals, or indeed to reduce down our ambitions around some of those projects because our finances won't allow us at this point in time to deliver them. So I think we'll have to wait and see exactly when we get to the market what that response is, but I think it is a real risk for us at the moment.
Yes, thanks, Chairman. I think you already answered what my potential follow-up was going to be, which is what impact could that have on our work programmes and schemes going forward? But I think you've answered that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Well, it is 2021 we're discussing. Anything that you mentioned would be for the future. Are there any? Yes, Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the report. And it's worth saying it has been a difficult time in the country, and I think a difficult time to manage the finances of a local authority over the last year, and that's appreciated. And so if I get excited about other things, please don't think that I've got it in for offices particularly. I haven't. I realise that running a council is not as easy as it might look to the man in the street or the woman in the street or anybody else in the street. I wanted to ask about, yes, we've been over a lot of this ground before. From my own curiosity, on page 269, which is reserves, line item 13 and 21, the crowdfunding, we had a reserve for crowdfunding and we've spent £64,000 on it. I don't know if anybody, perhaps a cabinet member, would like to comment on what we've got to show for the £64,000. The 3G pitch, I thought we'd put aside £200,000 for the a 3G pitch in the Deepings, or even a 4 or a 5G pitch. Is that the same money? If not, where is the £200,000 for the 3G pitch? And that also relates to somewhere else in this, which I can't find. If you give me enough paper, I'll get lost in it. But there is a reference to, I'm sure there's a reference somewhere else to money for pitches or leisure improvements. As a general point, which I've made in the other meetings, we're not building enough houses. We're not building nearly enough houses, and we really ought to get cracking with this leisure centre.
Just in terms of crowdfunding, that reserve was actually closed down because that initiative has since ceased. So that money of 64,000 wasn't spent. It was actually transferred into the local priority reserve. So there was no expenditure against that heading. The 3G pitch that's referenced in line 21 is actually the MERS. One of the requirements of Sport England for the funding of the replacement pitch at the MERS Leisure Centre was that we had to have a sinking fund to support replacement and maintenance of that pitch. The reserve, the pitch I think Councillor Baxter is referring to is the one at the Deepings, which is in the capital programme, not on the reserve page, and it is in 21-22s, not in 2021s.
There appears to be no further questions, so I'd like to move the recommendations 1, 2 and 3.
And I'm happy to second, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mark. All those in favour? That's unanimous of who's here. We'll get on to the next item, which is item 11. And I can find the right page. Yes, it's a Health and Safety Annual Report 2021. And I think Gary Smith is going to do this, and I would apologise for the length of time you've had to wait.
Thank you, not at all, Chairman. Yeah, so this is the annual health and safety report that you've received here. It provides an overview of the health and safety in 2020-21. As we've mentioned in the committee already, that was coincided with the COVID-19 pandemic. So as you would expect, it does cover that in its report as it has affected other items on for today. Lot of focus initially around physical health, but it does reflect, and I think will be appreciated given the full council motion that passed the other week around the mental health and well-being impacts as well of our staff members and others. And so there's commentary on that as well, which is something that's been given attention to. It also describes around the training that's been undertaken during the year. In terms of the accidents, those are reported. So draw your attention to the fact there were 49 recorded accidents. That's up 8 from last year. So it is a slight increase. It's broadly in line, but it is a slight increase. Clearly, we'd prefer no accidents, but in the organisation, both of our size and in the nature of some of our services, it is unfortunately a reality of operations that there will be accidents. Some of the reasons for that and commentary is provided in the report, but there was an increase in particularly two areas. Street scene is where, because of the operational nature of the area, that and the repairs team are where predominantly the accidents happen. In street scene, we had an increase in slips and trips and falls, partly linked to bad weather, snow and ice that we had earlier in the year. But we have also had some further vehicle increase in vehicle accidents. These are minor accidents in terms of the vehicles in the main, in terms of wing mirrors and scratches and whatnot. Not all caused by our operatives. Sometimes the operatives were the victim of and or had to take action to avoid worse collisions from others, road users. Anecdotally, there was, we know that there's been significant numbers of extra people working from home, and so if you can imagine a refuse collection vehicle coming down the roads, there's been more vehicles parked up at the side of the roads, and so that's made movement around slightly trickier in places. But as I say, no major cause for concern, but clearly the whole point of our health and safety policies and approach is to seek to both record them, monitor them, learn from them, and try and keep mitigations in place and under review so that we try and reduce them in the future. There were 5, again, just want to bring to your attention, 5 RIDDOR reportable accidents that have been reported using that process. And so those are the more serious accidents, the ones that need to be recorded and notified. The report then concludes around the future plans and work that we're going to go doing forward, some of which has had some impact and delay linked to the reprioritisation of our resources and staff, linked to the risk assessments that were there. Some of the higher priority areas have been done. One of the areas that as a corporate management team we're very mindful of and are keen to keep pushing with staff is the importance of reporting near-miss accidents. We don't get a lot, in fact, sometimes no near-miss accidents, and those are real opportunities for us to identify something and hopefully take action before an accident happens. So that's something that's always important to us. I'll stop there. I'm very happy to answer questions. I've also got Phil Swinton here with me, who's also happy to answer any questions that the committee may have. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I know that we've had no input from the leisure centre complexes because mostly they were closed during the whole of this financial year. Presumably they have refused to give you any figures. Would there be figures in the future getting from them? And the other point I've got is the poor chairman, when on her first meeting, fell down the steps here. I wonder if that was recorded anywhere in your figures.
Thank you, Chair. On the first point with the leisure centres, yes, I have spoken with representatives from Leisure SK Limited, and they will be able to provide almost identical. We can maybe tweak it slightly depending on the committee's needs, but they will reflect similar to that you've had in previous years. And yes, the accident was recorded and action is planned for that area in terms of the accident the leader had.
Sue Woolley.
Thank you, Chairman. Somewhere in here, I can't just find it at the moment, you've made reference to late reporting of accidents. Is it all employees or is it all members of the public that have been late in reporting? It's just that this might sound a bit harsh, but from an employee side of things, I'd be really disappointed. I know you've improved in getting people to report in a timely manner, but that really does need, stamping down on if it is employees that are reporting late, because of it's not just for their sakes, but it's for others as well that might be involved.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Woolley. Yes, it is. Unfortunately, it's staff. There has been one occasion when it involved a member of the public, but it's still through a work process that it came to us, and all 6 of those are that they are through late reporting through work. So we are driving down. I think it was 21, 22 last year. So it is an improvement, but we recognise that, and I think I've absolutely said that the target we should be looking for is 0. We have total control over when and how we report, and if an accident is a significant one, it may take longer than the time frame we ask for a full report to be completed. However, we ask for a notification at the earliest possible stage. So yes, we have absolute control, and we are driving, especially with the areas that are our frequent customers. We are driving that with them.
Mark Whittington.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. First thing at the bottom of page 288, under the COVID-19 response, this one made me laugh a little bit, but not at our staff members, but I've had this wonderful vision now of all of our staff members doing virtual exercise classes in front of their PCs at home. Yeah, I think that's the sort of thing, because we've spoken about mental health, and the problems and the motion we passed to the council. So it's great to see that this kind of sort of quite simple little thing, just to try to maintain that sort of team spirit and protect everybody's sort of mental health or whatever, basically allow them to have a bit of fun whilst interacting with their work colleagues. The question is around sort of working from home, and obviously you refer a little bit further up on that page to, obviously you went from having only 30 home workers to having over 400, and you weren't initially sure if it's going to be short term or medium term or long term or whatever, and the fact that you had to sort of do a whole load of getting all the home workers to do a homework in self-assessment form. Obviously they're going to be self-assessing, I'm guessing, there at home, and I'm guessing there's some kind of framework. Just sort of what potential impact does that have on our sort of corporate insurance type of thing? I'm just wondering, because obviously if staff are in the office or whatever in a working environment where you can kind of go and the experts can go and do the assessments or whatever, and I guess that's an essential part of our insurance. But how do we kind of sort of test the veracity of the home-based assessments to satisfy our insurers? Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, thank you. The process around the self-assessment is not an unfamiliar one, in the sense that's what would happen if they had been in the office as well. So there's no actual change in that regard. Support is offered and there is guidance provided. Clearly, if there were unusual or particular circumstances, then you would take that by exception and support could be offered. In some instances where that's been the case, actually the solution for some people, either because of their physical environment of their home space being too small, or perhaps not having appropriate connectivity or whatever, or because of the other householders, let's say, or in terms of being able to do their work, or because of their feeling self-isolated in some way. Some of those staff, a small number, by exception, they've been accommodated within the offices, but because it is a small number, that's been possible to do that. So it's horses and courses to that. In terms of your broader insurance point, or or question or reference to that, I'm afraid I don't have an answer to that. I think that's more of an insurance question, but I'm not aware of any particular issues. I mean, the point is we're legally obliged to carry out those self-assessments. We've done that, so that fulfills our duties from that respect. So I don't foresee any problems on the insurance side, which I think is where you were getting at. Thank you.
Ashley Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. Following up on the question that you asked about the Chair's accident in the chamber, I'd like to know when the remedial action is likely to take place to put that right. Secondly, just looked at the figures for the year before, where the totals for the equivalent table on page 294, there were 50 the year before last, which went down to 41, and now we're back up to 49. But in that year before last, there are actually 23 under the category of other. So I'm really pleased that you've got rid of other, because it's, especially when it's 50% of the accidents were other, that we're actually more on it in terms of what we do. I'm curious as to the unacceptable behaviour. Is that by our staff or is it by a member of the public? It could be either, and yeah, I don't want to get into the very details, but on page 296, under the table under paragraph 4.3, it is a bit concerning. The second one down, there's a description of a sofa falling out of the back of the vehicle and hitting someone on the head. That took 7 days to report. What do we do in terms of ensuring that staff know their responsibilities in terms of reporting accidents and so on? And how is it that such a significant accident wasn't reported all the way through for 7 days at least? There's another one further down actually as well. But if such a severe accident, you would think would be told to the relevant managers and authorities straight away. Thank you, Chair.
No response?
Yeah.
Jackie, no, just a moment. We're going to respond.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, in answer to your questions, it's members of the public in terms of the unacceptable behaviour, and so particular arrangements are put in place where there is threatening or other unacceptable behaviour. Just a wider point on the reporting delay, and then I'll pass to Phil, who will answer further some of the questions. So overall, we need to get better at it, and there's room for improvement, as we've outlined already. Very often, what we're actually talking about isn't that the incident wasn't reported straight away within the service, but that is then not passed to the corporate health and safety team, i.e. Phil, so that he can then make sure that the wider links are made and that the right process, and offer support to make sure the right processes are followed. So certainly that part of the issue is the delay between those two things. But as you're rightly saying, and as we've highlighted, that should be reduced to 0 because we should be able to report that quickly. But yeah. But action is taken within the service and they follow up. Okay, thank you. I'll pass to Phil.
Thank you, Gary. Yes, I mean, what I can certainly do for next time is we can clarify that point, that is the lapse in reporting to me, so that I can review the circumstances around the accident. So I can certainly make that change and make that a little bit clearer for next time if you'd like. In terms of the leader's accident, I've already contacted, my apologies, the chairman's accident. I've already made contact with the service area, and the repairs and the work needed will be in place before September, before it goes into full use, I understand, or is considered full use, full chambers.
Yeah, I can't, with some of these, they're obviously the employee is off work, so wouldn't the colleague or whoever was with him report the accident to you pre the day or the next day on?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we would normally expect that in a lot of cases. In some cases, it doesn't happen. I think there is a disconnect sometimes with staff that they don't feel it's their responsibility because they haven't had the accident. We have had some instances where an officer dealing with an accident has gone on holiday before it was completed, left for another officer to complete, and that miscommunication has happened, which again has led to a delay in us being informed of it. We are working with those higher risk service areas to reinforce the requirements, the needs, and an understanding of what a near miss is or what an accident is. They are different, but so we are trying to reinforce that with them. But we are still having a miscommunication at service level, unfortunately, at the moment.
Thank you. Jackie, did you want to have a word?
Having suffered an accident last October, I found it very difficult to find out who and where I reported it to. And when I did finally get through to somebody, they said, "Oh, it's over a couple of days, so you don't qualify anymore for reporting and getting help." I know it shook me,
because I'm still suffering. And I will be for probably another, I don't know how long. But when I tried to get a copy of the form that I had been asked to send in, they couldn't send it to me because they'd thrown it away. So that puts people off, I can assure you. And it wasn't here, but it was another, well, it was, I was asked to send the information to County Council, which I did.
Coming back, are you?
Sorry, do you know who you spoke to? Was this on or within SKDC property when it occurred?
No, it was on the road. With,
right, okay, yeah,
yeah.
sorry, it wouldn't fall within us. What I can say is if you have any incident on SKDC property at all of our information is on our website. There's a health and safety page on Monty, but you could always contact me directly, and we don't have a time frame. So whether it's 2 days or 22 days, we would still investigate the incident and the cause.
But when you've had one experience like that, you tend not to. You think, oh well, I'm not going through all that again. I think that is something that I know other people that have had similar cases, and they said it's not worth it. So, you know, it's not necessarily that they were I was on my way from the council offices to go pick up my car and go home. So,
Chairman.
You know, but it does put you off. I went up to the hospital, I got hospital records, but it didn't work. So
I think that's basically not to
time.
do with you, really.
No.
And it's not nice to point it out. Charmaine, you have a comment.
Yeah, thank you. But first of all, in view of the situation last year with COVID, was there any correlation identified between staff being redeployed and perhaps taking on tasks they wouldn't normally do, and accidents? It's possibly not, because they may have all been admin, but I've just wondered about that. Then I noticed our street cleaning waste collection team, the reports are indicating that they had more incidents during bad weather, slips on ice, etc. Well, I was really shocked. I remember where I live on Harrowby Road, watching the guys literally running down a street that was an ice skating rink. There's no other description for it on that day. And the question there is, what changes do we make to either their resource or the time we expect them to operate in when they are dealing in what can only have been described as dangerous conditions on that day? Then I wondered, what involvement do the union have when we examine the health and safety record and potential issues, and are working with you on the management team in looking at how the situation could be improved? And then last but not least, I noticed we have a number of incidents related to vehicles. Of course, they could potentially be extremely serious, depending on what they are, but how many of them are our fault and how many are the fault of other people?
Chairman, for you, I'll take a few of those, and then Phil will add, if that's okay, to those. Just picking up around the street scene, colleagues and the running in the snow and ice conditions. I mean, ultimately, the fallback position, if the assessment is made in the morning, if it's not safe, then they do not go out on their rounds, and that assessment is made. And so we did, during some of that period, have days where the operational crews did not go out. But in regards to then their operation when it is snow and ice, I mean, they do have personal protective equipment in terms of the boots that they're wearing, and various other things. Clearly, I wouldn't expect them to be running in the snow or the ice, and they need to. That's the responsibility they need to take for themselves, and they are given support and guidance. If you see anything that you think isn't appropriate or is unsafe, if you report that to us, and we can investigate and follow that up. The crews do have sufficient time to do the work and the job that they're set, and by and large they do an incredibly good job, and our accidents are low, but of course, as we said earlier, we always aim and would always should aim for there to be no accidents, so that's absolutely right. In terms of the other answers and the vehicles points, I'll pass to Phil, and happy to come back again if you want me to.
Thank you. If I just go to the union question first. I am in quite regular contact with union reps from a number of the service areas, and we do work quite closely together, and we'll talk about specific accidents or incidents or issues that we're seeing. They haven't specifically seen this report, and I haven't spent time with them on this report as such, and we haven't previously. We can certainly look to it, but this is obviously my report of findings on the work I've done throughout the year. But we can certainly something we can look to, and maybe the reps I'm already working with include them in that. In terms of the vehicle accidents, of the vehicle accidents we had last year, which were 22, 8 of those were as a result of third parties either making contact with our vehicles or causing our vehicles to have to take avoiding action, which is so just over a third.
Very quick. With regards to, I'm only picking on this because it seems to be an issue, the icy conditions of workmen. Where I work, we have to wear special clothing for certain circumstances. One thing I'm very aware of is that the guys, if they're, and I've no doubt doing their job, they probably wear steel toe cap shoes, but are they actually any good as far as gripping on snow and ice? Because these things don't always actually cover more than one thing, if that makes any sense. So I just wondered if we've actually checked that out to see how good the tread is, and whether we maybe need to get something else that's a bit more suitable.
Thank you. I can comment on this a little bit. I used to be a supervisor with the waste team, and the boots all have a slip rating when you buy them, which will either say S, R, A, B, or C. Waste, we always went for the C, which is the higher of the slip ratings, because they work in a number of environments, in a number of conditions. Now, obviously with any shoe, as they are worn, the tread will start to wear away a little bit. Operatives are able to access the boots as soon as they need them, so they can make requests on the morning should they have a pair where the tread wasn't superb. And the tread is also checked randomly when the supervisors do monitoring checks as well. When they will go out, they will look at the condition of boots. But it can go, they can fail at any time. We did also, when I was at Waste, we also trialed ice cleats, which are the thing that would slip over the bottom of the boot, but they actually were found to cause as many problems as they solved solutions. So it's not an ideal. And I think, as you picked up on, Councillor Morgan, it's taking the time, the appropriate amount of time, and not rushing in those conditions will obviously help to reduce accidents further. But the slip rating, yes, they do have a good quality of footwear.
Thank you. That appears to conclude the questions. I'd like to move the recommendation 1 at the bottom of page 281 and recommendation 2, because we've given comments and feedback to assist with maintaining the effectiveness of the council's health and safety arrangements. I think we've gone through that quite thoroughly. So I'd like to move those.
I'm happy to second those, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mark. All those in favour? Thank you very much. I can now declare the meeting closed. There's no other business.